I apologize for anybody if this is a little bit long-winded, but unfortunately, I think it might have to be. So we start off with the question: what's the difference between cause and allow? I, like the reformers before me, don't think that there is one reasonably, especially when you consider a certain number of traits about God.
I
If
agree.
he is the unmoved mover or the first cause, right, and he is omnipotent, and he is omnipresent, and he is omniscient, then the difference between the laws and the allow and cause is purely semantics. It makes no actual difference. It'd be
You're
kind
the
of like,
first theist I've heard say that, by the way.
well, I can give you a second one, and it's John Calvin. Now,
You
everybody
have
in
to
between, I
beg the
don't necessarily.
non-free will question, though.
No, I mean that person who's alive today that I've talked to. You're the
Yeah,
first
no,
person to
and
admit that.
that's totally fair. I get that because a lot of people don't. A lot of people think that, and I was actually amazed when I read the Calvin quote because I'd always felt that way, and even Calvinists typically don't enunciate that kind of a thing, but that's a real thing. If he has all these qualities, the difference between allow and cause is 100% superficial.
Yep.
And we can, of course, get into the nitty gritty as to why that is. But that, I think, is the first point that I think every
No, I
theist.
think I disagree. I think it totally misrepresents the relationship that God has with his creation.
All right, so pin that for a second then, because that's going to be important for us to talk about.
I think that's irrelevant.
Well, and to be
You
honest,
would.
I kind of agree with Doug there, but I do want to pin it just a second because Kelvin, I do want to interact with you as well. But addressing what Doug had asked here, so that's
No, I wish I could shut up. I'm trying to.
Well, it's an open room, right? This is just the nature of these things. You start talking about something like this, and everybody wants a shot. You have to shout over somebody to even chime in, right? So I'm not mad at anyone. But at any rate, so that being an unavoidable problem, right? You now have, I think, a situation that is much more analogous to, or at least by our agreement here, being an unavoidable problem. You have something now which is more analogous to an author telling a story. It's not perfectly analogous, but it is analogous in the sense that there are two seemingly contradictory, but not actually contradictory wills in an author, right? An author will, we'll just put some names to this. J.R. Tolkien wills, in a literal sense, that Sauron do everything that Sauron does. How do we know that? Because he wrote the book, right? So the idea that Sauron did something outside of the will of Tolkien is an absolute absurdity. That also being said, though, we also know that Tolkien wills for Sauron to not do these things and to even have an ultimate punishment in the sense of the story for it. And we know that because Sauron's the antagonist, not the protagonist. The protagonist is achieving the goals of the author throughout the story, Frodo, right, and destroying the ring and everything else that happens there in the story. We don't want to go on a huge list of it because it's like 6 hours worth of movie time and even longer if you're talking about the books. I digress, though.
Have you read on fairy stories?
On fairy stories? I don't think so.
Because he contradicts everything that you're saying as far as the relationship between the writer and what is being written, which again, it goes into my point about the difference between the Lord and his relationship with the creation. But
I like this analogy because, go on, CJ. I think this is going to go on, but I have a question when you're done.
Scooby-Doo do what Scooby-Doo does. Sorry.
Well, the point is just to say there, now what you have there is two in conflict wills of J.R.R. Tolkien, but they're not contradictory. They're in conflict because the antagonist and the protagonist are literally in conflict in the story. But they're not contradictory because they're all fitting into the weave that he's trying to weave, right? They're all part of the tapestry. Or they play their part in the story, you could say, to make it a little bit more specific.
Okay. Can I ask a question about this analogy? Let's say this was a writing that's not just a book, but a screenplay that's going to be acted out on stage. And there's no stunt work. It's all real life acting. So when it says in the story someone's raped, they're actually raped. They don't want to have sex, but it happens on stage. Now, the screenplay writer has the choice to make this screenplay become a reality or not. What would you think of a screenplay writer who would make this a reality? Everyone here would say that screenplay writer should be put in jail, an awful screenplay writer, if he makes it a reality. But yet with God, you don't say anything negative.
Yeah, and let me first off just make a quick quick jab here in the sense that not you necessarily, but just ideas, right? That in order for us to get around that problem, I think we have to entirely get out of the theistic issue to begin with. In other words, I would use that same. How am I going to put this? That was a stupid way to say it. I can have that conversation with an atheist alone because the theist has the same problem. Hence the allow and cause distinction that I don't think truly exists. Because he could have not written the play, but he
Right.
did.
I agree with you. The non-Calvinists have the exact same problem.
Now, the question then, from a Calvinistic perspective, would have a couple answers. The first being the sovereignty of God. He can do whatever he wishes, which is a little bit of a gut punch, I think, because a lot of times it doesn't help the conversation, especially if you're talking to somebody who's emotional. But genuinely, I have a joke I tell that God could decide he was going to save only every purple panda who was born on the seventh Thursday of September, and then laugh hysterically for a millennia while humans realize that nobody has ever met those qualifications. And nobody could do anything about it because he's God. What are you going to do? Tell him no?
Do you think God can be illogical, like square circles and that sort of thing? 2 + 2 = 57 and all that kind of stuff?
Well, I think logic is logical only because it derives from God's nature, but I think that it would be a little bit of a aside from the point. Because what my point is to say that God, from at least the Calvinistic view, has the authority to do whatever he wants. His nature may restrict him in certain ways, but he has the authority to do whatever he feels like.
But
right?
what you just said, CJ, is the main point. His nature can restrict him. So now here's the question. If God is in any way what we think of good, and if that's part of his nature, and if this God hates sin and evil, then why would he create knowing exactly that would result?
Yeah, so that's where I think you would get into the secondary element, which is to say, I believe that whatever is happening here, because I believe that God is a omnibenevolent being, is an ultimately holy being, all these different things that admittedly I'm assuming because I read them in a Bible, not necessarily getting from nature. But that said, I think because of those things, I can trust that whatever happens, regardless of how awful it is, um, there is an ultimately holy purpose
But
for
that
it
doesn't answer my
to.
question. My question is if God's nature is one that hates evil and sin, and if he creates, he knows with 100% certainty that will result of which he hates, why would he create anything?
Well, that's the holy purpose would be why, right? So
But it
if
goes
you
against his
have a
nature to create that which he knows with certainty will happen that he hates.
right, exactly. But notice here, in this scenario we have, it's his nature to create that which he knows he will hate. But if he has an ultimately holy purpose for doing it that is greater, it outweighs, in other words, the suffering that's going down, then he's creating knowing that this is
Okay,
merely a process to get to the end goal, which ultimately outweighs that which had gotten you
but
there.
CJ, with respect, think about what you just said. If it outweighs it and it's greater, can you get greater than God alone?
Oh, certainly not.
Okay, so there's no upside for God creating, and there's a ton of downside for God creating. So how could anything that God creates outweigh the negative evil and sin that he knows will result when you cannot get better than God alone?
Well, I would say I think there's a little bit of a category error there in the sense that I don't because we are how would I put this, temporal beings, and on my worldview that would mean that we are beings who God is seeking to have some kind of relationship with, but are doing so from a fundamentally different nature from Him because He's an eternal being, right? So we obviously wouldn't be able to see these kinds of purposes, and we're also not capable of getting to that level of nature. Eternal, by its very nature, has never been temporal. Even when you
No,
think
but
of like
this is
Jesus.
this is irrelevant to my question, CJ.
Well, let me
If
explain though why it's not though, because the main point I'm trying to get at here is to say that us outweighing God's greatness isn't a question. We are not even by our nature allowed to do so. But we can get to a level of greatness which pleases God for whatever reason,
But
right?
I'm not talking about our greatness. I'm talking about God's greatness. If God cannot get any better by creating, and is the result of him creating is evil and sin, which he hates, then there would be zero reason for him to create, because he's not getting a better world.
Right, but I think that's the point that I'm trying to make is it's not to improve him. The purpose of creation is the creation itself and what God seeks to do with it, right? So it's not like he's working out getting better, having some
Right. I'm not saying that he's
greater.
getting right. He's not getting better, but the world of God alone has to be better than the world of God plus creation.
Well, yeah, certainly. I mean, but I don't see, because I think that again, the ultimate point here that I'm trying to make is that that isn't the intention here. We have it's like the intention is not for God to somehow get to greater or even equal levels of great to himself by way of creating. In other words, he's not trying to add to. In fact, one of the confessions of the Westminster Confession, which I don't necessarily adhere to, but it is a Calvinistic document, is that God creates not to add anything to himself, not to have any sort of a, not for lack of want or anything like that. In other words, he does it just simply because he wants to. So the question would ultimately come down to, if it's not for some sort of improvement to himself, if there's no evil in a world that just exists with him in it, then the purpose has to be what he's trying to do with that creation. And that can certainly improve from where it is at
But
now.
there's the contradiction. If he wants to create knowing that sin will result with certainty, and he hates sin and doesn't want any sin, that's a contradiction.
I don't think it is, because I think that the sin is simply a mechanism to get to what it is that he's trying to achieve. And I think
Which
that
he
the
doesn't
author
need, right?
analogy works with that very well, right? Because
He has no need for what he's trying to achieve because he's self-sufficient as God alone. So there's no
right.
need to create anything.
So let's kind of break this through that author analogy really
This is
quick,
the
because I
real
think
problem of evil, by the way. When people talk about the free will of humans, that's all garbage. That's totally irrelevant. What we're talking about right now is the real problem of evil.
well, and I do appreciate that, because it is certainly different than the usually what I deal with the problem of evil is primarily emotional, which I'm not saying that to argue against anyone, but that's really what people are asking typically with the problem of evil is, why does this negative stuff that makes me
Right.
feel very negative ways happen? Um, that said, though,
All we do, though, it's not like people are getting away with it. Like, even believers, every word we speak will be judged. Like, I don't like when evil happens, it's always a direct result of disobeying God. Every act of evil. And those people will all be punished for their actions. So it's not like they're getting away with it. But when you say God's making these people do it, like that to me that's insane.
No, but in a way, God did make those people do it because he foresaw it, decreed it, made it.
No, I don't believe that.
Don't you believe God knows the future?
Yeah, but that doesn't mean he makes people. Like he always so when Adam and Eve sinned, he reacted to it. He gave them leaves.
Would Adam and Eve,
He's
I understand, but would
react
Adam and Eve have sinned if God never created anything?
would have Adam and Eve ever
Of course
said.
not, right?
They
If God never created, there would have been no sin, evil, pain, or suffering.
you can get mad at free will, but free will still has punishment. It's not like people are getting away
No, but do
with
you
doing
understand what I
evil.
said? There would be no Adam and Eve and sin if God never created, right?
well, I can make it even a little easier for you, Doug. There would be no sin if God didn't create one creature,
Right.
namely the serpent.
So, in that sense, God is responsible for every sin and evil that's ever happened because he could have prevented it by merely not creating anything.
No, you can just obey God and be a good person, or you can not and be dealt with.
Wait, here's a question though. Does the text really want to suggest that God made Satan Satan? Or does it seem to describe a perfect being until iniquity was found in you by way of your own beauty? Does it really want to say God determined that to happen? Doesn't
Well, I
seem
think
like
it misses the point though, because
Yeah.
this is kind of, it gets back to that first question that me and Doug would agree on, but which the non-Calvinists in here probably wouldn't,
Right.
which is allow and cause from God's perspective, considering the qualities we assume about him, it doesn't make any sort of actual difference.
well,
Right.
that's a presupposition. I mean, I
But I think I could prove it very easily, because if God knew what Satan was going to do before he did it, he has the option to create Satan or not to create Satan, and therefore
Exactly
to
right.
stop anything from happening.
yeah, that's you guys are both assuming you're sneaking in determinism or a denial of the idea.
No,
That's not true.
Jamie, no.
I see, because we know that there are two things we agree on. He's the cause of Satan's existence, right? And
You mean Lucifer?
yeah, anybody, just answer somebody, right? He's the cause of their existence, and he knew what they would do with their lives before they did it. Notice I didn't say he caused them to do what they did. We're leaving that entirely out for now. He caused the person to exist, and he knew what the person would do before they did it. So he could have not caused the person to exist. But notice this too. He also knows how and why the person is going to do what they're going to do. So in the case of, you could say Lucifer, iniquity was found in thee by way of thy beauty. God could have made him slightly less beautiful, and therefore that wouldn't happen, right? That doesn't impose on his free will. It doesn't change his fundamental nature or anything like that. God
I think
could have.
it could infringe on his free will in some way. We don't know that.
How does being less hot infringe on your free will, though?
I don't know.
See, exactly, though,
All
right?
right, here's
It
the
doesn't.
problem. I want to say, here's the problem with some of the Calvinist arguments. You're trying to argue this from the perspective of God, assuming you know what God knows, and assuming all these things about his nature, which may or may not be correct and logically consistent. My problem is Calvinism fails from the human perspective and observations of reality. It doesn't make sense. So why is God creating his beings in such a way that when we observe reality, the system we're being told in this holy book doesn't correspond to what we're seeing? Doesn't that make God the author of confusion?
Well, I just outright disagree with the premise. So that would kind of.
Well, the existence of those who exist forever with him, that are known as his children, the addition of those to his universe far outweighs the notion of those who hate him and who will be destroyed in destruction. We're going to go to hell.
And this-
Why doesn't it just say God caused instead of God knows? I mean, like the concept of God knowing to me entails that like it's inferred because he knew and because he's the first cause that therefore we should interpret that as determined, when the idea of knowing the future and then creating beings and then the narrative sounding like people are culpable and
Well,
responsible.
James, I don't think it even matters what word you use. The bottom line is if you believe God has foreknowledge and is never wrong.
Well, that's the thing. I'll say God ordained everything. Like in that sense, in my mind, ordained means knowing
So forget about the word you
and
use.
producing it. But I think there's another layer that's being ignored, and that is the ability of man to actually have. I mean, call it magic if you want, but sure feels real.
Yeah, but again, it's so funny
If you
because
acknowledge God has a will, but then I don't know why you wouldn't acknowledge that in this theoretical God, because I know but then why wouldn't you acknowledge that a human being could have a will? And because I don't see where you're seeming to be implying a causal link between knowing something is going to happen and then actually causing it. I just don't see it there.
No, because the causal link is not in the fact that you can have a situation with actual pure libertarian free will, and you're still going to run into this problem.
Yes,
because
I agree.
Thank you. It's weird that we're agreeing on this because
I know CG and I are aligned on this. The thing is,
because you're a dirty Mennonite.
No, Mennonites are not Calvinists. But,
that's right. Sorry, my bad.
But CG and I are aligned on this because we know the consequences of omniscience, omnipotence, and the free will of God. We understand the consequences.
Wait, what free will of God? How, if every reason that I give to say we have free will, you have a reason why we don't? Why would the God with a perfect nature, who's limited by an inability to sin, I say, why should we apply that to God and say he has a free will? If he,
Well,
Well, hang
if
on,
this
he
though,
is
'cause
don't,
we're
this is
getting
how
we're
some people get around it, Jamie. There's three outs to the problem of evil. You limit God's omniscience, so you become an open theist. You limit God's omnipotence, and you view him more like Thor than a really powerful God. Or you say God doesn't have free will, and he had to create. It's part of his nature. And some Christians go that route.
well, no, I don't think if you can
false.
deny free will for us, you have absolutely no arguments to think, if not less reason to think that God's free and fate is our God.
Well, hang on though, because I think that's a different argument. I don't think that it's necessarily a good one, to be honest. But I think it's a different argument from where we're getting now, because we're kind of going off on the rabbit trail a little bit, right?
Well, I have to say, I think it's the best argument against determinism, honestly, but you can have to explain that to me.
Well, then let's pause for a moment though, because we're jumping to a couple different points, and I want it all to get discussed.
So, like, yeah, it's not a good argument because it totally disproves us.
No, because it doesn't disprove anything at all. God doesn't have libertarian free will. God cannot lie, Numbers 23:19. So it's simply just a lack of being able to read the scripture, to be honest with you. Like, it says it in exactly those words. And I don't say that to be rude. I'm just saying that to say, like, the idea that we think that God being bound by his nature is a good argument against us being bound by our nature makes absolutely no sense at all. The Bible does say that God's bound by his nature. Many different places. It says he can't lie. It says he doesn't change. It says he doesn't change his mind. It says he can't break a covenant. I mean, so on and so
So,
forth.
CJ, is that the out you take? Do you say that God had to create?
So no. I would say I do think that all creatures and God himself, who would not be a creature, I think we all are limited by way of our nature. Nature is not an external limiter or anything like that. It's
Nature
something
is
from
just a description of what you're like.
Right. But is God like a person who could have chosen not to create anything?
Yeah, I think God has the capacity to do so, and you could even to
Well,
make
then
it
you're
even
still
real.
stuck, I think, CJ.
See,
You're
wait,
still
here's the
stuck with the
problem.
problem.
This is what I was pointing out. We're trying to think of this as if we know all these things about God. Let's see if Calvinism corresponds to reality as we humans observe it. And I would argue it doesn't even come close.
Well, can you give a specific example of something you see in the world today that doesn't align with Calvinism?
Yeah, so many. I mean, so first of all, when I can't even think of an example because there are too many. I mean, let me give this one. Calvinism maintains that humans are, quote, totally depraved, the T in tulip, and we can't accept the things of the Spirit unless we're regenerated by the Holy Spirit. So when a person believes in whatever they think entails salvation, that's a result of God indwelling them. But then you somehow have, and you're supposed to have perseverance of the saints. But we have 2,000 years of history showing that people believe and then they stop believing. So that just
Yeah,
proves
but you know what the
Calvinism right there.
Calvinists say. They were not true believers to begin with. We don't know the
They,
mind of
they
God.
believed in the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. They testified, they confessed, they baptized, and then they apostatized.
Yeah, but only God sees the heart. How am I doing, CJ?
Yeah, it's perfectly. You almost quoted 1 John 2:19.
Yeah, they're just
I
gonna
want-
say they were never true Christians or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay, well,
they were never of us.
The scriptures say even we cast out demons in their name, and I never knew
you
you.
think these people were just playing a game the whole time? They never really believed.
They were
in these
deceived.
things.
They were deceived.
They were
They were
deceived. Okay, how about they believed and trusted in Christ, and then later in time they chose not to? That's what it appears happened.
I know.
See,
I
this
understand.
is your
I understand
problem.
what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. But this is what the Calvinists would say, and they have a perfectly fine argument. It's very hard to
The
disprove that.
Calvinist is reading these people's minds, and it doesn't correspond to your interpretation of Scripture, so it should be true. So okay, you're right. How
Well, it
can
doesn't correspond with things which are
Well,
said in
there are
Scripture. But it's also,
there are all these stories of pastors and people who evangelized later in their life, thinking things through, and I think coming to a wrong decision, but saying I no longer believe this.
True or false? People can be deceived. The scripture teaches that people can be deceived. Is that true or false?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's not the point. The point is you cannot accept the things of the Spirit according to Calvinism, total depravity. These things accept
you
the things
realize
of the
that's a
Spirit.
Bible quote, right?
God
Well,
cut off the
whatever Paul said, the what did he say?
Yeah, he said the
unbelief.
natural mind does not accept the things of the spirit, neither can do so.
Right. So we have people doing this. The only way they can do it is if the Holy Spirit regenerates them and allows them to do it or whatever you all. But the problem is, how do you get a situation where if God's in you, you're supposed to be perseverance of the saints. We're not seeing perseverance of the saints. Calvinism's wrong.
No, you just said it yourself. If God is in you, then you'll see perseverance of the saints. So if you don't see the perseverance of the saints, then God's not in you. That's
No,
how
the
Calvinists
problem
would
is
answer.
the problem for you,
Exactly.
Tom.
So if you have a tree that you think is going to be an apple tree, and it turns out the pears grow on it, then it was never an apple tree. It didn't stop becoming an apple tree.
CJ, John 16:25. When you want to, let's look at that because I'm curious your interpretation.
Well, real quick, because I wanted there's a couple
Yeah, later
things
on, whatever,
that I
it's fine.
wanted to address before we leave, right? Because the question was, how would I get around this? The question from Doug, at least, but how would I get around this? God creating when He's not adding anything to Himself or anything like that, right? And I think again, you can return to the author analogy to get a good idea of how. So J.R.R. Tolkien, who just left, doesn't matter. J.R.R. Tolkien did not add anything to himself by writing The Lord of the Rings. He didn't have a lack of hobbits in his life that was somehow filled by way of his writing The Lord of the Rings, right? He did so simply for his own purposes,
Disagree.
simply for his own pleasure. Hang on just a second. So he does so simply for his own purposes, simply for his own pleasure, right? And we know, because we've read it, at least I've read these writings, we know that he's very much against the destruction of nature, but he wrote the destruction of nature into his story, right? Saruman, when he's building the army, he destroys the Ents forest and all that kind of stuff. And Tolkien was an avid environmentalist. He thought that we should be preserving that kind of stuff. So here's the point. Tolkien adds nothing to himself. He has no Lord of the Rings shaped void in himself, right? And he created something that he knew beforehand that he was actively going to hate, but he did so because it brought him pleasure in the end with the finished product after everything had been said and done. In other words, that what happened to the Ents is ultimately outweighed by Frodo's
Okay,
victory.
CJ, I understand that analogy and I like it. However, here's the problem. It's almost like God's imagining what He's going to create, but doesn't actualize it. It'd be like Tolkien saying, "Not only am I going to write this, I'm going to make it a reality, and I'm going to make a screenplay where they actually destroy the environment, something that he hates." Now, if he truly hates destroying the environment, he would not actualize that screenplay. This is sort of what I said earlier. And this is the case what we have with God. If he truly hates sin and doesn't tolerate an ounce of it, he would never, ever have created.
Well, I will grant you that the ultimate destruction of the analogy there is the fact that Tolkien creates a fictional world, right? So in the
Right.
end, this is all make believe, and that certainly does create a little bit of a difference, no doubt. I think it's the closest you could get to somebody being able to create, though. I do believe in things like compatibilism and stuff like that, but it's a little rabbit trail for now. Related, but little rabbit trail.
You should use Narnia as an analogy because Tolkien totally disagrees with you. And his entire theory of the way an author and a creator create
But even if it's not Tolkien, it doesn't matter. You can imagine any author who might do
it
this.
totally matters.
Well, no, the reason it doesn't matter is because the what I'm using in this analogy is not just like Tolkien's theory, which, by the way, having read a
No, but
lot
it's
of
an
his
insult.
personal
It's
writings,
an
I
insult to
haven't read
Tolkien.
the one that you had
As
brought up.
a
But I haven't
Tolkien
read a lot
fan,
of
I must protest.
well,
Tolkien will get
just
over it.
to be hang on though, because I think there's a
Tolkien
couple
would
things that are
scoff.
important to mention. Tolkien certainly was very much in line. Now he's not a Calvinist; he's a Catholic, right? So he's a lot of differences from what I believe. But a lot of my beliefs do directly come from some of the stuff that Tolkien talked about, like for example, the idea of sub-creators and stuff like that. That all being said, though, Tolkien is interchangeable in my analogy. Replace him with C.S. Lewis, with George Lucas, with George R.R. Martin, with anybody else who's ever written a story. The point of the story is to say the story writer is doing these things, and we can see these things work by way of what we observe in reality. We can see that any story that has an antagonist, clearly the author willed that antagonist into existence because he's written from by the author, right? And clearly he's against that antagonist. Otherwise, he'd be the protagonist or a side character or something else like that, right? Um, and you know that's the idea of those wills there. And then you also have the idea that I just brought up as far as like going through something that the person actively hated. I mean, Tolkien's the one who tells us that Tolkien hates the destruction of nature and what the purpose of Saruman destroying the Ents forest was and all that other kind of stuff, right? So that's the stuff is just objectively true, and it's true of any author. It doesn't matter what the story is.
Just
Because
read Leaf by Niggle. You'll know what I mean.
But CJ, how do you get around my pushback that it's not actualized in your analogy?
In a way, I don't. I'll be honest, because it's there's a question of why would you do it if you knew that it was a real sort of a thing.
Right.
And I guess I don't necessarily know why that is. I don't know the ultimate purpose for God's creating these sorts of things. I do think I can reasonably say at least some of them, which is genuine relationship with his creation, manifesting his own attributes in time in front of an audience.
All things he doesn't need.
Yeah, all things he doesn't need, certainly, but things which I think he wants to do, things which I think are pleasurable to him, and I think they ultimately have us in mind as well. You know, the Bible does say everything works together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. Now, to be fair, that's not necessarily everybody, but I do think that is ultimately something that when everybody gets into heaven, I don't think anybody's going to be sitting there thinking, you know what, God, I don't think it was worth it.
What about the people who go to hell?
So that's an interesting question. Some people think that the people who go to hell are continuously cursing God in hell. I don't necessarily know if I believe that or
No,
not.
but do you think the people in hell think the creation was worth it?
CJ, you're not. I've sensed that you might be considering going back to that horrid, absolutely absurd belief that people are bumptiously giving their chicanery to God every second forever after they're thrown in hell. But Psalm 37 says, well, look for their place. You look for them and you won't find them. You look for their place and it won't be there.
Yeah, I do think ultimately there is an annihilation, so I agree with you on that. But I don't know. I guess that's a good question. Would they, the Bible does say every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess. So will they think it's worth it? Maybe not. Will they understand it? Would they have done the same if they were in that position? Be genuinely.
The scriptures basically hint that most people will end up in hell, whatever that means. And so I think if you were to have a poll at the judgment day, do you think God should have created anything? I think the majority of people say, no, he should not have created anything.
Well, they die anyway and they expect nothing.
No, but that would be like forfeiting those you love for those who hate you.
Yes, that's and that's what Jesus did. Right? He gave himself up as a sacrifice. So here's the question: would every Christian believer who believes they're going to hell sacrifice?
What do you mean that's what Jesus is?
That the sacrifice of being, what I understood you to say is that the people who go to heaven, would they be willing to sacrifice and say, I am no longer going to heaven, so people don't go to hell?
Well,
and then just no creation. Like, would people give that up? And I think if you follow the teachings of Jesus, you should say, God shouldn't have created.
Well, see, and I would disagree with that last element, but to kind of answer your question in the sense of like, do we, as Christians, are we to have this kind of a view of like, I would forego my own pleasure for others?
Paul said that. Moses
Paul said he would go to hell for Israel. Exactly. I think Jamie just said that. You said Paul said that?
Yeah, and Moses. He was quoting Moses pretty much, wasn't he? Or saying the same thing he did that Moses said.
Yeah, so the Bible certainly does teach that we should be like that. Like if it meant that in the case of these two, if it meant that people in our nation would be saved,
don't you think we should think also that this is what Paul means when he says, imitate me as I imitate Christ?
Well, I think he does mean it. I think one of the things, Jamie, that you do kind of confuse often is that you confuse the idea that determinism means no free will, and that's not true. It means no libertarian free will.
Oh, I wasn't actually coming after determinism there. I was just thinking about what, like, we don't dare think Paul thinks he's more loving than God, would we? That's all I had in mind. I wasn't even actually coming against determinism there.
Yeah, certainly not. And
not knowingly, anyway.
well, and somebody, I did get my point ultimately out as far as the analogy there, so I do want to let you guys speak. But the last thing I just want to say here, real quick, before I let whoever wants to jump in, is just to say, I think that these kinds of problems that we see here, it's not that they're not good problems as far as like good to question, but the answers are very often just kind of there in explicit words, and I don't think people like them very much. The why does the potter say to the pot, "Why have you made me thus?" kind of thing, right? It's like it's right there in the text. But we don't like to think of ourselves as pottery, or in the case of the analogy I've been giving, as characters in somebody else's story. But I think we are.
I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
don't think
if
that's the reason.
I don't know if the analogy works though, because there's Pine Creek's concern. That's a separate issue. But the reason why you raised the analogy is that you were suggesting that um, Tolkien had a reason to create or write Lord of the Rings, but he wasn't like improving himself and making that decision. But the idea is that if Tolkien wanted to write a story, um, that sort of implies that he thought it was good to write the story, that it would have, and that implies that not doing such a thing would be worse. The state of affairs where he doesn't write Lord of the Rings is worse than the state of affairs where the story is written. So if we're taking God prior to creation, all the state of affairs is himself. He is, I'll say, he is alone or in the community of the Trinity, whatever your view is. The idea is that if God wanted to create, and that implies the belief that it's good, which implies that a world where it's just him is less reasonable or not as good as the world in which he creates. So you still have a if you want to avoid this kind of determinism, right? I don't think that the Tolkien analogy will work.
Well, notice though, even in what you just said, right? It is true that there is something, at least in Tolkien's own mind, that is better about this. But notice it's strictly limited to what he desires, right? In other words, it's not like he got physically stronger or a little bit more intelligent or something like that, or the world was cured of hunger or something, fill in the blank. Rather, it's simply that for the good pleasure of Tolkien, it is better that this exists than it not. And I would completely agree with that statement about God. For the good pleasure of God and his holy purposes, it was better that the world exists as is than the world does not exist.
But the world without creation is just God. So that's another way of saying that just God is not enough. There needs to be an improvement on just God.
No, see, because again, you have to say that when you're talking about not enough, that's some sort of like a qualitative, quantitative kind of thing, right? Where you're saying like,
No, it's normative. It's normative, meaning that, look, God is deciding between a reality with just him and a reality with him plus him and creation. If he wants to create that reality with him plus him and creation, that means he believes that reality is good and reasonable to bring about. And God never does what is less reasonable. So he's not going to he's not going to continue in his solitude, right? And if you think that in his solitude is just as good, then there's no reason to arbitrate the decision. The decision is there random, right? So that's the conundrum that I took Pine Creek to be raising.
Right, but I don't disagree that it's reasonable or that it's something, I guess you could say, quote, good. But what I'm saying is that goodness is only something that exists within the mind of that author. It's not like it's not a usage of like when we use like morally good, for example, right? Is it good for somebody to, well, maybe not morally, because I guess different ethical systems will answer this differently, but is it good for a little girl to have food in her belly or no? Right? There's a lot of direct ways, morally speaking, in terms of her health, in terms of her psychological well-being, and all that kind of stuff, where the answer is
What are you disagreeing with exactly? Like, what is it? Where did I lose you? I'm trying to.
yeah. Well, I'm saying there's no improvement or lack of goodness in God not existing, and so with this particular example, there is a lack of goodness with that little girl not having food, right?
No, but
But it's
look,
not like
if
that with
the
somebody
idea
writing
is
a
that you
story.
have one option that's good, and the other option is just as good, then if one action is taken over another, there can't be an explanation. So it's random. But if one action is good and the other action is not as good, right? Then, given God's perfect rationality and omnibenevolence, He's going to not do the less or good, right? In this case, the lesser good is just Him in existence without creation. So He is going to be improving upon the state of affairs when He creates, given
See,
that.
and that's what I'm harping against, right? Like, and that's why I give the example of that food. That's improving upon the state of affairs. You're hungry. If you don't have the food, you get the food. You've improved, right?
Wait, what do you mean by
Thank God.
maybe look, if I say I improve upon the world, right? That means that had I done differently, it would have been lesser.
Yes, exactly. And so the food is not saying improving the well-being per se,
Right.
although
And
that's
if
exactly what's
it's
happening.
lesser, that means it's not as good, right?
Right. And so my point is to say that when we're looking at an example like, for example, food or an immoral act or any of these examples, when you say not good, it's because there is a something to be added here. There's something lacking in whatever we're doing, right?
Well,
But
it's
in
just
the
I mean,
case
not good
of
just means it
somebody
ought
who's
not to
just
be
writing a story,
not
the
good just
only
means it ought not to be done or not be actual. It ought not to be actual.
right, and so but when we're talking about with somebody's like the pleasure that somebody gets from doing something like writing a story, that's not improving from somewhere that was in some way negative, like morally lacking or qualitatively lacking or anything like that. It simply is pleasurable to the writer, right?
Wait, okay, I'm losing you. So you have option A and option B. Option A is better than option B. And if you're already in option B, right? Let's say the state of affairs is that of option B, then to move to option A would be an improvement, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, so the point is that it's you presumably you don't think God's decision to create is random, which means that there's something that the change is one in which he ought to do. He ought to. He has a reason to change the state of affairs. Now, if he has a reason to change the state of affairs, if God had done otherwise, that would have been not as good. It ought not to have been done because it's not as good as the change.
Right. So, but I think that where my problem here is there is, when we look at this, an author, for example, there is no ought not to there, right? There's nothing that you could say he ought not to have written Lord of the Rings because it's just a matter of if he wants to or doesn't want to, right? It's not a matter of any sort of an improvement of any particular area, whether that's well-being or whether that's his morality or anything like that. There's no lesser option here. In other words, he's just doing what he wants to do, right?
Okay, how are you
So
distinguishing when you're talking about? Do you think God should do anything? Do you think that makes sense to you?
yeah, certainly, but let me
Okay, wait.
make sure, like,
Is that oughtness understood in terms of God's desires or outside of God's desires?
I mean, I guess you could say God ought to work within his desires.
Right. So when we say this ought to happen, that means we're just describing God's wantings, right? God's desirings.
See, that's where I disagree, though, because when you say God is, it's you have this example where it's just God and He creates something, and so that was more good, right? There's a subtext there. You're implying that something was lacking in God existing in and of itself, that He's not in all sort of
Well, if it was just
perfect.
if you're saying that the state of just him is just as good as the state of affairs where it's him in creation, then there's no reason for God to change anything.
See, but then see, I think that's where we have a problem here because I think it's just as good For an author to not create their work, they do so because of their own pleasurability. There's no
Yeah, that's a
improvement,
reason.
there's no leaving for. But when you say a reason, I think I know that there's a very
In
often
the context
people
of God, a reason is going to be his own desires.
right, and that, but notice how that fundamentally changes everything here, right? Like, let's just
I
give.
don't see how it does.
I'm gonna give a little. I love analogies, right? So let's give an analogy real quick to show how you get a Fruit Loop or a Cocoa Pebbles. You decided to go with the Cocoa Pebbles, right? You could say you ought to have gotten the Cocoa Pebbles because that's what you wanted, okay? But if you had your Cocoa Pebbles and your Kashi's Cinnamon Harvest, which is a good source of vitamins and minerals and all that kind of stuff, then that ought to has a fundamentally different connotation. You ought to have gotten the other because it's better for you, right? Because it
Yeah,
improved
but
your state
I
of
don't know what
well-being.
those terms mean, divorced of, like, if we, I don't think the analogy is going to translate, because the way that you're using ought to and better is divorced from desire, whereas that's not the case for God. You've already agreed that when we say that God ought to do something, we're just describing God's desires, right? So in your analogy is disanalogous because the notion of ought is divorced from desire. Okay.
But what it's trying to demonstrate is that there is a sense in which your ought is not an addition of anything to you. It is simply your good
But we're
pleasure.
just talking about God's desires. The point is that if God has most desire to bring about a state of affairs which is Him and creation, then that means that the alternative is less desirable.
Yeah, certainly. He had less desire for the alternative than for what we have now. I would
All right,
completely
less
agree with that.
desire. Yeah, if it was less desirable, then that means
Well,
that
see,
that
you changed the
alternative.
words there. I said he had more desire to have what we have now than to live by himself. But you said if he was less desirable, now that's different things. You're talking about his quality improving. And this is why I'm trying
Wait,
to
I'm
bring up
lost.
these
I'm
different
lost. How did you
examples.
understand me?
The words you
he
said is
yeah,
if he was less desirable, right? So what you're saying when you say he is less desirable, well, you're setting up here as a system in which God is improving upon himself by adding creation. But
Yeah,
that's
well,
not
if the
what's
point is
happening.
that
He's
adding
simply
creation is what's most desirable, that means that the alternative is less desirable. We agree, right?
in the mind of God. You're right. He
In the
desires
mind of
one more
God.
than the other.
So that means that when God is comparing the state of affair where it's just Him and the state of affair where it's Him and creation, He finds the state of affairs where it's just Him less desirable, which means it's not as good because goodness is understood in terms of God's desires.
yeah, CJ, I think Danny got you to kind of contradict what you said to me earlier. Like when I talk to many theists, even I've talked to a couple philosophers on this, and I ask them which world is better, a world with God alone or a world with God plus creation. They refuse to answer that question because of what Danny's bringing up here. They will not go there. They will say, I don't know. Because as soon as they take a stand, they're in trouble.
No, I don't think that's necessarily the case.
Because if they
There's a
say
lot of
God
atheists
alone
who
is
disagree with
better,
them.
then he would never have created. If they say that God plus creation is better, then they have to admit that God needs sin and evil to be better.
See, but and this is why I keep saying this. Like this, I understand that this distinction you guys are not finding. Maybe there's something I need to go back on to make sure I'm articulating it in a better way, or maybe I need to get my thought more streamlined. But I think there is real importance to this idea of, in one scenario, you have something that is better in that it adds to you in some way, and in one scenario you have something that is better in only the way that you desire it. It's, in other words, it's just simply something within your own mind, right? Whatever you can say the mind of God is, that's a kind of a thought in and of itself, right? But he's not adding anything in level is in as it pertains to his greatness. He's not becoming somehow healthier, more morally upright, more intelligent, anything like that. Any sort of quality you want to have.
Are
The
you
only
using
thing
adding normatively? Like, are you talking, because like that's confused for me. I didn't ever use that language. All I'm saying is that if God had more reason, or most reason rather, to create, that means the alternative is less reasonable. If he had equal reason, then that means that nothing decides or explains why God created rather than not. So it was random.
Yeah, I
Okay.
believe that's right.
Right. So if there's the horn. Either it was random that we're here, right? Or that
Can you define that? Random.
God found this more desirable. The alternative of just him being less desirable. Goodness in this case, or oughtness, is linked to God's desires. So that means that God ought not to leave the state of affairs where he's in solitude or it's not as good, which means that if given God's perfect rationality and omnibenevolence, he could have not done differently because he can't do what's less reasonable or not as good. So you're left with a kind of necessitarianism.
What about create? What do you mean by random? Like, why not just a desire?
Well, the point is that if God has equal desire to create rather than not create, there's no explanation for why God acts one way over another.
Yeah, it's going to be like the explanation is the whole key, right? Like what explains this is some antecedent condition or link in a causal chain, right? So if you go all the way back to God, then it's like what explains him choosing one world over the other, right? Unless it's by random choice. Now I have a different account of that, but I was listening to the Calvinist perspective.
Doesn't he just want more kids?
You asking me that?
Anybody? I don't know. It just seems like he wants to grow his family or something. I mean,
Well, yeah, that just is going to say that he desires something, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, does that mean he's better for it?
Yeah, that would be if that's a serious explanation, then it's no longer equal reason. Then one has most reason. He has something that he has most reason to do. The alternative is less reasonable. So you would be committed to saying that just God is less reasonable or less good, since goodness is tied to God's reasons, than a world with creation.
Yeah, I think there's going to well, somebody else want to say something?
I have to. Is there any scenario in which you all think God could create the universe and there's evil and it exists as it is and it's reasonable? Like, what would be the most reasonable scenario to you?
I already gave it. The answer is the three outs that I gave earlier. Number one, that God's not omniscient. He was truly surprised when he saw sin and evil enter the world. He said, what is going on? I didn't expect this. That's option one. Option two is that God is not omniscient, omnipotent, and that he's actually a little bit needy. He needs people to worship him. Not just desire or want, he needs it. He feels incomplete without it. He needs to demonstrate his love. That's option two. Option three is he's not free. He has to create. He knows what's going to happen, but my hands are tied. I had to do it.
Yeah, I don't think that's
so become an open theist, and you can solve the problem of evil a lot better than regular theism.
I don't think that trilemma holds up, though. Danny, do you agree with that trilemma, by the way?
Yeah, you could also, I guess this ties in with the second one. You think God could fail, like he tried really hard, and then he just that's omnipotence.
Yeah.
I guess that's a strike on his omnipotence.
In other words, you have to make God more like us.
I
don't understand
there's like here's another thing you could deny. There's actually, I think there's four outs. You could just deny evil. There is no evil.
Yeah,
or a fifth out, God is partly evil, like the Zoroastrians believe.
Yeah, I mean,
or I would even say you have a sixth out too, right? Which is this idea that all things are determined by God for ultimately holy purposes. So these reasons, and then at that point, the reasons are what you're talking about, not why it happens. The question of why
it happens is God's reasons.
Say again?
Wait, what about like kind of a deist understanding where God starts the universe, but with the caveat that sentient beings have libertarian free will and can sin and do evil things?
You have to give more than like if this God is not, if you don't claim this God's all good, then you're free. There's no problem with evil.
He withdraws his power, in other words. He withdraws control.
But as long as he knows the future of creaturely free acts, right, there's going to be at least partial responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so.
What do you mean? How can God not be responsible if he knows what's going to happen?
Yeah, I'll tell you.
Why is he? The real question is, why is he responsible for allowing evil to take place, knowing very well that it would lead to Adam and Eve and all his descendants experiencing the consequences of their actions? I need to know by what standard are you judging God to determine that allowing evil to take place as a means to understand the consequences of your action
Whenever I
as
hear
something
by
that
what
is
standard, I'm going like, come on, precepts. Converse, I want to hear your answer.
no, wait. It's a real question. Why don't you answer
God's
that?
standard. We're using God's standard.
What is God's standard as it relates to that? Why is it evil, or
God
why
does
does
not desire anyone to perish. He creates a world knowing that some will perish. We see a tension, a contradiction, so we wonder, maybe this God doesn't even exist.
But why? What does desire got to do with him willing to save those who belong to him?
See, now we're playing the semantic game. Desire, will, decree.
They're not the same thing. They're not the same
The
thing.
only way it makes sense for God to have two opposing wills.
Wait. Desire is something that's personal to him. Will is something that projects from him.
Is
So
God
why-
okay with any sin?
What is the word okay? We just use
Does
the
God
word desire.
like sin?
There's no word like in the
Does
Bible.
God
There's the word
desire sin?
there's the word desire and there's
Does
the word
God
will.
want sin?
There's the
Pick
word
any word you
desire.
want to use and answer the question.
There's two words that's in scripture: desire and will. Desire is personal. Will is something
Does
that
God
projects.
desire sin?
No.
Did
Therefore,
God know sin would result by creating?
yes, he
Did
did.
God desire to create, knowing that sin would result?
100%. Therefore,
So
It's like
God
you're-
does not desire sin, yet God desired to create, knowing with certainty sin would result. Am I hearing you right?
go ahead.
This is all based on determinism.
wait,
You
wait,
don't see
let-
the,
let-
you don't
let's
see
see
the
the point.
tension?
What is the tension? Therefore, follow through with your argument.
God does
But
not
you're not
desire
giving me
sin.
you're not giving me a conclusion. Tell me what
God
your
does
conclusion.
not desire sin, you said.
Exactly. And
God knew with 100% certainty that by creating, sin would result.
amen. So your point,
So did God desire to create?
100%. Therefore,
Okay, God does not desire sin. God desired to create, knowing with 100% certainty sin would result. You don't see a problem there, do you?
And you didn't come with a conclusion yet. Can you follow
The
through with your
conclusion
argument?
is-
I think something is being ignored here. God did also establish a system of justice, which will be
Totally
rendered upon
irrelevant.
those
It's
who
totally
proceed.
irrelevant because
I don't know.
Wait.
Justice will be done.
You still have not shown me the conclusion of your argument. What
the
are you trying to
conclusion is
establish?
this God does not exist.
Well,
Because
it
it's
doesn't follow through.
contradictory.
It doesn't follow through because he desires for
I want to hear Converse's answer.
Yeah, no, but let me respond to what your ridiculous argument, because this argument of
What Tantric is saying is that God has conflicting desires or conflicting wills, and that's not coherent. If God,
How is it
God
conflicting? How is it
omnipotent.
conflicting? You didn't establish
Can you,
it.
Well,
can
God
you
will.
steal
He
man what I
will.
said?
Okay, wait. Now
Let's
you're
see if
using
he
the word will.
understands that.
Hang on,
Wait,
guys.
wait.
Hang on. So let's try to, because I don't think anybody's really making a point right now because of how, back and forth it's going. So let's.
Can I just clarify one thing? Because Pine Creek used the word desire, and I just said desire is something that's personal to God. It doesn't transcend from his being, so it's personal to him, and it doesn't project from his being. So can you explain to me? Because Danny used the word will, which I said projects from himself. So his will is something that is transcendent, as opposed to his desires. So can you explain to me the fact that he desired a world, knowing very well it would lead to sin coming into the world? How does that affect, according to what Danny just said, a conflicting will?
Does God's will conflict with his desire?
No, they don't.
Oh, God
There you
didn't
go.
will sin?
Of course not.
Okay, so you did, wait. Okay, so when God willed the creation, knowing that creation there would be sin, do you
Yeah.
think that doesn't count as responsibility for you, or you didn't cause?
No,
sin?
because when he willed creation, he said everything was good. So, and he
Yeah,
also
no,
does.
no. The point is that if God wills creation and there's sin in it, it's infected or whatever, that means that His will explains sin.
How did sin
He's
come in the
never
world?
going to concede any of this. Dan.
No, I'm
He
really trying
can't
to
see it.
figure out.
I don't know if he even understands what we're saying. Can you
I'm
repeat back
understanding
what
because
we're saying?
No, but here's the issue, and CJ, thank you very much for your hospitality. I just want to understand what he's saying, because it seems to me you're suggesting because God willed a world that is good without evil, and He also willed that people would have free will, and that because of free will, sin came into the world. He's somehow responsible.
Yes.
What's the connection? You're not making
Okay,
You're not bridging the gap.
I'll make the connection for you, but I have to ask you questions first.
Go ahead.
Do you believe God was surprised when sin entered the world? Was he?
Of course not. Of course not.
So he knew it would happen, yes?
Exactly. So how is he responsible? You connect the
Okay,
gap.
I gotta ask, hang on, I gotta ask you another question. Would there be any sin or evil if God didn't create?
No.
Listen to your answer. You just said there would be no sin, no evil if God didn't create. Did I hear you
Exactly.
right?
Exactly. Your point?
Now we have sin and evil. Why? Because God created.
Created, and who brought
So
the sin into
I
the
understand. Let me steelman you. I understand what you're
Okay.
saying. You're inserting the free will of man in there,
Okay.
saying, okay, this gets me out of this problem. But people like Danny and are saying, no, it doesn't.
Why
Because,
not?
because God could have chosen not to create anything. Therefore, if he created people with free will, knowing that sin would result, he is at least partially responsible because he could have chosen not to create and no sin would be there.
That doesn't really follow, because you're
Sure, it
saying
follows.
no, you're saying, okay, so let me get this straight. So there's two options you're providing here. God shouldn't create and there would be no evil, and God created everything that is good, and the byproduct of people having free will is the fact that they disobeyed and brought evil into the world, and somehow that makes him responsible because people disobeyed him.
Yeah, so imagine a person who disobeys God freely, okay?
Yes.
Would they have disobeyed freely if God never created that one person?
There would be no existence. So
Right.
we wouldn't
There
be,
you go.
we wouldn't be having this discussion. I don't get the point you're trying to make.
What Pine Creek is saying is that God's desires or will, whatever you have there,
It's not the same word.
explains sin.
Yep.
Explain sin?
Yeah.
What do you mean by explain sin?
All that means is that without God's will or desires, there'd be no sin.
Yeah, that's all we're saying.
So basically, what you're saying is God shouldn't have created this.
Yes, not only that, we're taking a step further. The fact that that creation exists, that we exist with sin and evil, of a God who hates sin and evil, is at fear of offending all the Christians in here.
No.
This is evidence that your God does not exist.
You see, that's the point I'm not getting. How did you bridge the gap? The fact that he allowed sin in the world.
We're just going to repeat ourselves.
No. But here, listen to the point. The fact that he allowed sin in the world, knowing very well it would serve as a lesson, is that evil? Explain to me, is that result, the byproduct of that, is that evil?
Well, so let me kind of chime in here for a minute, because I there's a sense in which I agree with you, Stanley, in that I think the answer ultimately is found in God's will, as we've of course been discussing. But I do think that the how do I put this? I think that the concession does have to be made. It's probably not the most politically correct word to use, but I do think the concession has to be made that there is no fundamental difference between God allowing something by free will choice and God, decreeing it to happen by way of puppeteer work. In this, because what we have is, we were given the example earlier.
I like that. I agree with you, but not many people will be willing to admit that.
No. The reason why I disagree is because you're a Calvinist, so we don't have the same position as it relates to that. I just want to make that clear. That's a problem that they could bring to a Calvinist.
Yeah, but
the problem of evil. The problem. Can I just finalize my statement and I'll give it back to CJ?
Should ask you. I guess if we're interested in that question, I don't think you're going to be able to give a principal difference between the God with those kind of special omni properties and the distinction between God decreeing X and God allowing for X. There's not going to be a distinction.
This is not a Calvinism versus non-Calvinism issue.
There's a big
I
distinction.
fully reject that claim.
No, there's a big distinction, because allowing something doesn't mean he's responsible. You're trying to be responsible.
What is it in the case of God? What does it even mean for God to allow X to occur? What does that mean?
I mean, he allowed it, basically.
Yeah, what does that mean? Tell me what that means.
What do you I have to define you what it means to allow something? Are you serious?
Go ahead.
Are you serious? Well,
I can tell you what I mean by allow, but you're not going to like it.
I don't see how I could break it down.
Danny, maybe this will help. Stanley, I know this is a crude example, but let's work with it. If you give Danny a gun and you know with 100% certainty, and you're never, ever, ever wrong, if you know with 100% certainty that Danny's going to use that gun to kill me, are you in any way responsible for my death?
If I give that gun to Danny?
Yeah.
I would be responsible, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
You just made God responsible for evil.
You see, you're still not making the link. A gun is something that is.
Well, hang on. So let's pause for a
okay.
second, right? Because this is what I was kind of trying to say with that. And by the way, same thing I said to Doug earlier. I know that most Calvinists won't say that, but actually, John Calvin did say the same thing, Danny. If you're interested in reading what he had to say.
Oh, thanks for sharing.
I wanted to make sure you
Yeah.
Calvinists are you all for 100% banning guns? Because obviously, if God, you know,
God decreed guns to exist, Jamie.
well, I mean, even if a gun thinks it has free will, the guy has to pull the trigger.
God
And if
loves
God
to hunt
pulled the
ducks.
trigger, then and it's the gun's
Well,
fault.
so let's go back, rewind a little bit, though, right? There are two things every theist agrees on, and I mean every. We'll go at least monotheist. Excuse me. Every monotheist agrees on, whether they're Sikh or Zoroastrian or Jewish or Calvinist or Catholic or whatever. We all agree that God is the creator, and that God is, well, man, I guess I can't necessarily say all. Most of us agree that God is also omniscient, right? There are open theists out there, though, so I want to qualify my beginning statement. But most monotheists, cross-religiously, cross-denominationally, will agree that the monotheistic God is the creator, and also that he knows all things, right?
I'm kind of an open theist personally.
We'll get to you, because that's going to be completely different way of being dealt with. By the way, I appreciate you being here, and all of you guys. I haven't said hello to most of you personally, but I appreciate you guys being here. Anyways, so if God created Satan, which we would agree on, and God knew what Satan was going to do,
I disagree with that.
You don't think that Satan's a created being?
Lucifer is a created being. He didn't create Satan. He became Satan when he allowed sin to come into his heart. Big difference.
I'll be precise there then. We'll say Lucifer. God created Lucifer. So we would agree on that. And God knew what Lucifer was going to do infallibly. God could have, A, not created Lucifer, in which case what Lucifer was going to do no longer matters because he didn't create it. God also could have, B, created Lucifer in such a circumstance that was not ever going to occur, right? Maybe he was less beautiful, so he didn't get as prideful. Maybe he was restrained to a isolated kind of position, so nobody could admire him.
You isolating this Lucifer still is a mischaracterization of the entire process as we know it, though, because we know there wasn't a single will, because you're talking about him creating wills, not just simply Lucifer. And what happened with those wills?
Right? What I'm trying to do now is demonstrate there's no difference between God determining a will and God allowing a will, right? Because what we're saying is God is the creator of this being and knows what this being is going to do. And he can limit that being in numerous ways, on top of not creating the being entirely. He can limit that being in numerous ways that would cause his will to be different or to be limited in its actual efficacy, right? So what's a perfect example? If Hitler was mute, he clearly...
I don't know if we can say that for any certainty of what God does with wills to make them wills. That right there, I think, is...
But we're not talking about that, right?
In the sense how God makes wills.
But we're not talking about him like fashioning a will, right? We're talking about God. If God were to make Lucifer less beautiful or Hitler not a good orator because he had a stutter, those don't violate their free will, but they're going to influence what they desire, because somebody who's a poor orator is probably not going to be sitting up there giving these fantastic speeches, and as a result is not going to love the power they get from making not so fantastic speeches, right? Shaquille O'Neal would likely not desire to play basketball to the same extent if he wasn't 7'1". If he was 5'1", maybe that desire tapers off because a greater desire comes in, namely the desire to stop losing all the time when everybody else is 6'5" and above. So there's multiple things that God can do that causes that person's will to blossom differently, but he doesn't. He decides to create as it is, right? He decided to create Hitler as he was, with all the physical talents he possessed, which he didn't have to give him, in the land where he lived, which he didn't have to put him in. Imagine if Hitler had been a mute. Honestly, no violation of free will. You didn't kill him. You let him have a great life, all this other kind of stuff. He's just a mute. That's it.
Hitler, he wouldn't be Hitler then. Basically, what you're saying is, if God created Lucifer to be something else than Lucifer, then he wouldn't be Satan.
No, that's exactly my point, because I think God did create everything with ordination of what is going to happen in mind. This was his desire. He painted out, or he is painting out the image which he seeks to paint. But the just real quickly to finalize, what the example here is trying to demonstrate is he could have painted it any other way he wanted, even if you assume a purely libertarian free will. But it didn't. He could have made Hitler a mute there, and now Hitler keeps his free will, he keeps his life, he keeps his physical and mental health. He just can't give really powerful speeches. And there's no Holocaust, there's no World War II, there's no Nazification of Germany, right? I mean, all you would have to do is make Hitler a mute. Could God have done that? Of course he could have, but he didn't.
I disagree with your analogy, trying to make a decree and connect it to God allowing this to happen. Because basically what you're saying is, if God could have made Lucifer less beautiful, then basically the lesson of pride would never have been brought to our attention. I'm saying that he allowed it to be this way so that we might learn from this experience. I don't think experiencing evil is something evil. I think it's beneficial. So this is
where you're misunderstanding me, my friend. I agree 100% with what you just said.
No, but you said decree. You're trying to attach that, or trying to make a link between decree and allow something.
Saying. You just don't realize it. You're saying God decreed these things. It was better for these things to be than not to be because it taught us certain things. That's exactly what I'm saying. God had holy purposes for decreeing everything as it is rather than a different way.
Here's my only difference is I'm not saying that he decreed the evil to take place. You see, you're saying the evil that took place, the Holocaust, is something God decreed. I'm saying no, he allowed it for the purpose of us understanding the lesson of what evil does to a person, the consequences of evil if we go against the will of God. That is the purpose. But you're saying that he decreed Lucifer to become Satan, which is very problematic.
See, in my opinion, I see, and maybe everybody else can chime in because I appreciate the back and forth. I don't see a difference in those two positions.
Yeah.
From where I'm standing, you sound like a Calvinist.
Stanley, did you allow Danny to kill me, or did you cause it?
I was gonna just about to address that. The difference between God allowing free will and the example that you're providing, me giving a gun to Danny, is not the same thing, because a gun is not a good thing. Everything God created is good. A gun is not a good thing because you could kill somebody.
Did you allow Danny to kill me, or did you cause Danny to kill me by giving him a gun that you knew with 100% certainty Danny would use to kill me?
I'm part of the cause of.
Yes.
Yes,
you
but that's not the same
part
thing.
of the cause.
That's not
so God is part of the cause of evil.
It's not analogous to God giving us free will. Free will is something that's pure and good. A gun is not good. So you're not. The analogy doesn't work.
Danny had free will.
Hard. I'm sorry.
Danny had free will.
No, you're trying to make a comparison with free will and a gun. A gun is not something
Forget
that's
about
pure.
The gun. The gun's irrelevant. Danny
that was part of your analogy.
Danny killed me with something you gave him.
A tool that is not good. What tool did God give that was not good?
Right. Danny used his bare hands to kill me, and he's a creation of God, and his hands are good.
Okay, so
now what are you going to say?
It would be logically possible for God.
I didn't send Danny. I didn't send Danny to kill you.
Be equally as good as God.
I wouldn't be responsible if Danny killed you with his hands.
What if what if you brainwash Danny to kill me, and you're always effective with your brainwashing? Would you? Did you cause Danny to kill me?
I will be responsible. Yes. How's that work with God now?
Okay, now
God didn't brainwash nobody.
If God knows with 100% certainty that Danny would kill me,
yes,
is God at least partially responsible for Danny?
No, because brainwashing and foreknowledge is not the same thing. Man, you're trying to make connections.
Hang on. But God created Danny, right?
God created Danny, but he didn't brainwash.
If God didn't create Danny, would Danny kill me? No. God knew with 100% certainty that by creating Danny, it would lead to Danny killing me. Is God in any way responsible for Danny killing me?
He's not responsible for
He's not responsible, even though that he could prevent it by not creating Danny.
Basically, if he didn't create anybody, then there would be no problems. But again,
heaven is God's, the earth he gave to man.
It's a gift. Life is a gift. I don't get the point you're trying to make. First, you went to
The point I'm making is if you're omniscient, you're partially responsible for your creation.
Make the connection. Foreknowledge. Try to make the connection between foreknowledge and responsibility of
Because
our
what
actions.
God foreknows will happen. Yes or
Yes.
no?
Yes. Now tell me the link.
If
the
God
tangible
knows
link.
something's going to happen with 100% certainty and he creates it anyhow, he's at least partially responsible for his creation. True or false?
In what sense is he responsible? Give me the tangible
link.
link.
If he didn't create it, it wouldn't happen.
No, you're not showing me the tangible link. Show me the tangible link between foreknowledge and the actions we commit in time and space.
I just think you're obtuse, Stanley. Like,
no, but Pine Creek, I'm just saying I'm obtuse.
You're purposely just saying, show me the connection, show me the connection. And I say the same thing over and over again.
You can say God is partially responsible. He created it.
Yeah, I'm giving you an out.
No, Jamie. I'm not even. I would never say he's partially responsible because that would be blasphemy at the highest degree. All I'm saying for the people that's listening to you, Pine Creek. But Pine Creek. All I'm saying for the people that's listening to you, if you're going to say foreknowledge has an impact on our actions, please show the tangible link. If you can't do that,
I'm saying that I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is, if God knows the future and he's never wrong, and if God has the free will not to actualize the future, in other words, not create Danny, then he's at least partially responsible for my death.
No, again, you're not showing
that you're presuming that God it would be logically possible for God to create something that's equal to himself. That's the only way that wouldn't happen, that something wouldn't exist that would somehow do something that's quote unquote evil or lesser, would be for God to create something equal to himself, which I don't think any of us would agree is possible.
Like with free will, or is that what you mean?
That's not possible.
What do you mean by equal to himself?
I just think everything he just said was nonsensical.
Me personally,
having a will, yeah, but you also think having a will is nonsensical, and yet here we are. We all have different wills, and according to you, we're just one giant will that's playing with itself, right? That's nonsensical.
I want to flip the tables. Why isn't it on a Calvinist view? Why isn't God the guy who just shot someone in court, who pulled a trigger and shot somebody, and he's saying, I'm not guilty because God assigns guilt to sinners. But if you're saying he's the one that pulled the trigger on everything, and why is God's like God's in court having killed a man with a gun, and he's saying, no, the gun killed the guy, the gun's at fault, and so therefore you should ban all guns. It just seems like that's absurd, and ultimately God is like saying, oh no, the gun is guilty, it deserves punishment, but even though he pulled the trigger, like that makes no sense to me.
Well, so let me say, first off, Doug and Danny, with what you guys were talking about earlier as far as the better worlds, I'd like to continue to explore that later, but this conversation is still
the main issue.
Yeah, and I think that it might be, because of the fact that I'm the only Calvinist in here, it might be wise for that to happen in a format that is not an open room. So if
it's a problem for now. I think it's a problem for whether you're Calvinist or not. So
yeah, I agree.
It's not your problem. Sure. It's
Carvers.
I just like to make a. Okay.
Well, but real quick though, because I just wanted to say that because I didn't want that to go fleeting, because that was a great conversation. But this is also, and I don't want to just cut anything off. So I just wanted to let you guys know. If you're interested, I'd be interested in having a conversation either later tonight or later some other time, just on the channel.
Yeah,
to Jamie's
pretty interesting issue. I think that another way that to frame, I guess there's a name for this argument, and I forgot it. But the whole point is that if God's
Pine Creek argument.
Good, what?
It's called the Pine Creek argument.
I think, unfortunately, you're denying the element of faith that is required here, to where you would agree with these atheists because you say this makes more sense than anything else, even though you have to admit that per your view as a Christian, it doesn't make complete sense. But because it makes more sense, whereabout, in my view as a Christian, I would say in faith, there's some other answer other than that these atheists are correct and that God is evil and there's no free will and there's no point to anything, which is essentially what.
Notice I wouldn't agree with those things though, right? Because, I think there is a little bit of a teaching moment here, and correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but there is something to be said for the fact that you guys have disagreements stemming all the way to the very basis of like everything. Why does anything happen at all? What's the nature of things being created, right? And it never ends up getting any farther than that. Whereas with me and the atheist, it's important to note there's one distinction or problem, and one problem only, as far as how this jives intellectually. And that is, why does God have a desire to do these things if indeed he does have a desire to do these things? Why does God need to improve upon himself or have any addition to himself? Why is it better, right?
Yeah, the real
What
problem
makes
of
you think
evil.
we're entitled to know these desires, or do you even understand them?
No,
That's-
here's the difference, Kelvy. What we're talking about here with the real problem of evil is from the standpoint of just prior to creation. So imagine nothing exists, no humans, no nothing. And so any talk about human free will is irrelevant. Any talk about Jesus dying on the cross is irrelevant. It's the question of here's God, what is his nature? And here's creation, what resulted, hypothetically. Now, before creation, he has a decision to make, create or not create. And if he chooses create and it goes against his nature, that's a problem.
But this again, this is the false. This is a false representation of creation, because he created and everything was good. Here's what these skeptics are trying to do, and this is incumbent on them to establish. For them to establish their position, they have to show the link between God's foreknowledge and eternality and our actions in time and space. If there's not a link, every conclusion they're trying to establish is totally.
But if God's outside of
making that
time,
kind of claim.
Stanley, if God's outside of time, this whole idea of everything when he created everything is good is irrelevant, because
what are you
it
doing?
became
was the
bad.
time.
It became bad.
No. In time, it became bad.
Yes.
It became bad in time. So how
Which
are
God
you?
knew with certainty would happen.
But again, I just said it a couple of seconds. I'm going to say it one more time.
Why are you
What
repeating
you
yourself?
need. Let me repeat it, because it seems to me you're not getting the simple concept I'm trying to establish here. What you need to do is establish the link between his foreknowledge and eternality. Make that link with what happens in time and space. Until you cannot bridge
Here's
that
the link.
gap.
I'll tell you again. Here's the link you're looking for, and then you're going to not understand it and just push back. But I'll say it again anyhow. The link is that God could have freely chosen not to create at all. That God knew the future, that it would result in something he hates. He desired to create, which you admitted.
Who said he hates?
Who
said he hates it?
I asked you. Didn't you say that God hates sin?
He hates sin, but again,
yes.
How is that something he hates when he allowed it to happen?
Yes. Okay, here we go. Does he hate sin or not?
I was just about to add a different point to it that's going to establish my point. Can I just finalize my statement?
Careful, you're getting in
trouble. He allowed
now.
sin to happen, knowing very well the lesson that will come from that. Now, you need to explain to me why allowing us to experience trials and tribulation for our own benefit is something evil. That is what you need to establish.
He hates sin.
You didn't address the point. I'm addressing the sin part. Sin came into the world. He allowed it. Okay,
right.
So that addresses
he allowed
the sin
something
part.
he hates, right?
No, he allowed something that he hates, knowing very well it will be beneficial.
So he allowed something he hates.
What was the next point I just said? We agree on that part. He allowed something that he hates, sin, to come into the world, knowing very well it will be beneficial because we would learn from the consequences of our action.
Okay,
so this is something that's beneficial.
This gets us back to morally sufficient reasons and that a greater good would result. So is it your contention that God created a better world by allowing sin to happen?
No, I'm saying that either world is good. There's not a better world.
Well, that's obviously true.
A world without sin or a world with sin, knowing very well it would we would learn the lesson from it. They're both good. That's the standards I'm establishing.
There's no better or worse. There is no better or worse.
To go on the previous kind of
did you notice how I got it?
I don't see how what you had just said, and the thing is this is going to be the same for virtually every other apologist. I don't see how what was said there is fundamentally different from the question of Calvinism. You agreed he created it. You agreed he could have created it in a different way, but decided it was better to create it in this way. In this case, we're saying with free will, so that we would have lessons that we learned, or for I would just be vague about it.
I didn't say that. CJ, I didn't say that. Did you notice how Pancake choked at my last statement? I said either worlds would be good. Either. No, I know. There's not one. There's not one better. There's not.
Well, really, either world.
I'm not saying that that's wrong, right? What I'm saying is where me and you, Stanley, agree here is we agree that God created everything, right? And we agree that God knew everything that was going to happen. We agree that God could have created it in a different way or not created it at all. And we agree that he created it this way for an ultimately holy purpose.
I agree.
I don't see how that, in the end, how that is not.
But here's a
different
question for
from me
both of
just
you.
saying
Wait.
what God
Here's a question
ordained.
for both. Is it equally good? Both
Yeah,
worlds.
and here's my response to that. Either position, either he created or not created, is good.
Okay.
Now, I could establish that.
Let me do an analogy here for you, Stanley.
Go ahead.
Imagine a cheesecake. I love cheesecake. It's my favorite dessert. Imagine cheesecake represents God.
No, I can imagine that. I'm sorry. Come with a better.
Imagine that dirt represents sin. Okay. Would you rather have? This is from God's perspective. Would God rather have himself the cheesecake, or himself the cheesecake topped over with dirt? Sin.
Yeah. And how
which plate would be better?
Well, wait a second.
Wait. Let me respond to that. Let me respond to that. No. He asked me the question, and then I'll let you go.
I have a unique position.
No, I'm gonna let you go, please, because he again comes with an analogy that's not compatible to what I just stated. Because I said there was a lesson to be learned. Where's the lesson to be learned with dirt on a cheese? First of all, your analogy is disgusting.
Well, you could reframe the problem in terms of could God.
Don't let him reframe. Look, if you're gonna hold him to answer the hypothetical, then don't reframe it for him.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Because every time he's coming with
it, dude.
Every time.
I meant repose, right? Then the problem.
No, but before you do that,
don't be charitable to the analogy. Just let
I
it.
haven't even said anything.
Before he does that, I just want to show how he's unable to adjust the points. I'm addressing his points, but he's not addressing my point.
My question was, which is better, a cheesecake or a cheesecake with dirt?
To me, a cheesecake. Now, what's the point
better, God or God plus creation?
To me, a cheesecake with
dirt. Both of them are good.
I can tell you
why are both good.
Cheesecake with dirt is better. It's easy to explain.
No. Both of them are good.
No, listen. Stop. Does water taste better when you're really thirsty or when you're not thirsty at all?
Really thirsty.
Oh, and does overcoming conflict feel good if you've had to persevere through it?
Yes.
Or so if you had to eat cheesecakes with dirt your entire life, and then at the end of your life you get a cheesecake with no dirt, that's the best thing ever, right?
Yes.
Okay, then introducing
so God
dirt,
needs that? Is that what you're saying? God needs that dirt so he can really enjoy the
Wait. He's making a good point.
Doug. I know you're excited, Doug. So introducing dirt
so we need
the cheesecake tastes better at the end.
For us.
Oh, okay, so then dirt is good. You should have dirt on your cheesecake.
Okay, but now let's apply this to God, because that's
good
what
point,
the analogy was.
Go ahead. I'm all ears.
So does God need sin to really appreciate non-sin there, musician?
No.
Does God need to what is God appreciating? He's just
our sake.
You notice how you just kind of
everyone else
from that?
God doesn't need to appreciate it. He's just making it a better overall. Right? Like if he gives everyone a cheesecake from the get-go,
you notice how quickly I answered your questions directly and honestly. And then when I ask you the same question back, you just kind of.
No, I'm answering your question directly. If God gives everyone a cheesecake, they go, okay, this is the only thing I've ever tasted. It's not really good or bad. It's all I know. God gives everyone a cheesecake with dirt on it.
I'm talking about God, not humans. Does God need sin in order to appreciate non-sin more?
No.
Wait, what? How did you?
There you go.
This is why I think this is the area where I would start to agree with Stanley in the sense that when Stanley says,
no,
either is good. I think that is true. Either God sans creation or God plus creation is equally good, because the only thing you're talking about is God's desires. So whatever he desires is what's good. It's not like he's in, and this is why we got in that sort of back and forth harangue with, I guess it wasn't a harangue because it's two of us, but nonetheless, the back and forth talking about like, is it better for God to have a world with creation or not? It's like, it very much depends on what you mean by that. If you mean like there's a quality that is improved in some way, like God is lacking within himself, then I don't think that there is, I think there's no difference.
Well, there's
but
another
now we agree, CJ. And this is the thing. This is the thing. I'll give some advice to Christians. Don't let these people use words that are not found in Scripture, like words like better, best. These are not terms that we are acquainted with.
Can I use in vitro fertilization?
Okay. Can I just finalize my statement? When they use words like better, these are things, subjective terms that could bring confusion to the matter. So remember, he asked me which world will be better. I'm saying they're both good because God is good. That's his ontology, and everything that proceeds from him is good as well. So the world that he created was good. He is good, and the world he created is good. So
Is sin
that's
good?
that's. I'm sorry.
Is sin good?
He didn't create sin. Again,
Okay,
you're
wait,
Is suffering good?
I have
Is
to
I'm sorry?
interject
evil
here.
good?
I have to
he
interject
didn't
here.
create
So,
evil, and he didn't create sin.
I'm not asking if
wait.
he created. Is sin good?
You were
No,
right.
it's not.
Can I interject here? You were
Does
right.
wait,
the
wait,
world
wait, wait,
contain?
let
Does the world
concrete.
contain sin?
Yes.
So
And what
Sin
was
is
my
what a
not
response?
man
good. The
can
world
mean for
contains
evil,
sin.
And what
God
was
can
my
use
response?
for good.
Is
And what
better
was
or
my,
just as good?
what was my response to that? I said he allowed it. Why? So that we might learn a lesson, the
All that's
consequences.
irrelevant.
No. So okay, so this is basically what he's saying, and let me finish my statement. So you're saying that God allowing sin to be in the world so that we can learn a lesson from the consequences of our action is not good? What standard are you using to come to this assessment? This is what you need to tell these skeptics, because they're coming with their subjective opinions. You need to tell them what measurement that
Stanley, you're
allow you
saying
to
a
come
world
to.
with sin is just as good as a world with not sin. Am I hearing you wrongly?
I've been said both of them are good. I've been said that.
Is
So
a
now
world
you,
with sin just as good as a world without sin?
exactly. So now argue against
Really? You're going to say that?
that. I said it like 20 times. Where were you for the last 5 minutes?
Wow.
but
Do you think
again,
sin should be done?
no, sin should not be done. But the lessons that we get from
So if it
our
should not be done, then it
I'm going to
shouldn't be
finalize my
done.
statement because you're repeating questions that I already responded to.
Okay,
sin
but
is
if
not
it shouldn't
good.
be
Sin,
done, if it shouldn't be
sin
done,
is
it's
not
bad,
good.
right?
It sounds like
Sin
you're saying it's neutral.
is not good, but the
If sin should
experience.
not be
the
done,
experience-
all things considered, then it's
Okay.
bad, right?
What if it's
I
neutral?
already
Dan?
wait.
Saying it's
hey,
neutral,
hey,
Dan.
Hang on. Hey,
He's saying it's neutral.
I appreciate you guys, but I think we're getting to that point again where nobody can tell what the point is because
Yeah, Danny, he's saying it's neutral.
Okay.
No,
so
no,
then
no,
that,
no, no. I'm not saying it's
that
neutral.
contradicts the claim that sin ought not be done. Because if,
No,
if it's
CJ,
neutral, then it ought not be
CJ.
done, and it's not going to be
It's
true that it ought not
ultimately
be done.
neutral.
at all.
and just a sec. So let's real quick. I want to let's have Stanley get the whole thing out, and then Danny
Thank
you
you.
interact directly with the
Thank you, CJ. How many times I just said, because this is the point that they're doing. Sin is in the world. How many times we agreed with that? I'm saying there was an experience that come with that will ultimately be to our benefit. Have they addressed that? No, they keep on going back to the sin. Oh, the sin in the world. Is sin good? No, sin is not good. We said it. No Christian will ever say sin is good. What a Christian will say is God allowed it for our own benefit so that we might experience the trials and tribulations for the consequences of our actions. So a question that an atheist or a skeptic has to respond is, by what standard are you judging that God would allow evil to take place in this world
God's
for our
standard.
own benefit, be consequently result in something that is bad? If
God's
you cannot
standard.
respond to that, then you lost.
God's
Look, if you're
standard.
if you're saying sin is for the greater good, then all things considered, sin ought to happen. If sin ought to happen, that means sin is good, right? And then you're committed to saying that sin is good.
If,
no
if
evil.
and when sin happens,
Sin is not good,
for,
but the consequences of
that's
that.
all you need.
Wait. How is sin good? When I said the consequences, the
I'll go
experience.
premise by premise. If you're saying
Okay, go
sin
ahead.
is, you just stop me when you disagree.
Okay.
If you are saying that sin is for the greater good, then it should be done
I didn't say
for
that.
the greater
I didn't
good.
say that. I didn't say that.
Is sin for the greater good?
No.
Okay, so sin, there's no greater lesson that we are to learn, or
What is for the greater good is our experience of committing sin or bringing sin into the world, our experience knowing very well our disobedience. This is what happens when we disobey God.
sin is not for the greater good.
There is no greater good.
No.
Only God is good.
No.
Yeah, how
Because
about
I already didn't I already agree that a world without sin is as equally
Can
good
can
to
good
a
come
world
out
with
of
sin?
sin, Stanley? Can good come out of sin?
No.
Oh.
Is this just
Now,
going to be
what
a,
did you say earlier? Something
like,
about
is this
we
an
have
open
sin in our
panel or no?
lives to do what?
I said the experience of us disobeying God, going
Yeah.
through trials and tribulations, will
Yeah.
ultimately lead us to a lesson that will be for our greater
Are
good. But
these
that's not
lessons
sin.
good?
It's not sin.
Here
Why are you
Are
trying
these
to?
lessons
Pause on
for
that
our
real quick.
greater good?
So
Isn't
pause
that-
on
Defining
that real
yin
quick.
yang as if there's a
Getting
black and
ridiculous.
darkness and a whiteness. That's not the case.
Hang on real quick. I want to, this is just an open mic, so nobody's like breaking rules or anything, but just because there's so many people who want to get their voice in, I want to kind of moderate a little bit. Musician, you've been
Thank
trying to
you.
say something for a minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, a few different things. So first thing I have to point out here is that when Doug brought up the cheesecake analogy, do you not remember how he presented it? He goes, let's bring up cheesecake. I love cheesecake. It's my favorite dessert. Now, he presented it in a way that obviously the way that this analogy was designed is we are humans that enjoy eating the cheesecake, and we don't enjoy eating cheesecake with dirt on it. Okay. Then when I responded with, well, if you ate nothing but cheesecakes with dirt on them your whole life, and then you got to have a cheesecake with no dirt on it, his response was, but does God need to appreciate your, like, what? No, we're talking about my enjoy. You can't design your analogy about my enjoyment of the cheesecake, and then when I present to you a situation why the dirt could actually enhance my enjoyment overall in the long run, you then switch it to, but why does God need dirt to appreciate your like your non-sin? Like, what? You can't just introduce an entire. You can't swing the whole analogy around to like now it's about God appreciating you. No, this is about, do you enjoy cheesecake? Yes. But if I've only ever eaten cheesecake, then there's no better or worse. However, if I've eaten nothing but cheesecake with dirt on it my whole life, and then at the end of my life, I get it pristine, the best cheesecake in the world, that is a marked improvement from the cheesecakes with dirt. So that's steelmanning your analogy, and I don't really see a problem with how, in that case, introducing dirt would ultimately could at least enhance a person's experience in life.
Doug, go ahead.
Okay. That's my response to musician.
Wow,
Okay.
that's really smart. That's really smart, Doug.
It's smart because I realize it's no use talking to you.
Oh, really? Is that what it is?
Exactly what it is.
I've never thought, you never really shy away from it's your analogy to begin with. I just thought you'd have something more clever than
If you
that.
were smarter, you would get it.
Oh, okay. If I was smarter, I would get it.
Oh, no, sorry. I should say less defensive. If you were less defensive, you would get it. You would realize that the analogy of the
How am I
cheesecake
defensive
started with
responding
God
to
and was being applied to God in the first place.
So, one thing I do want to.
I'm just responding in a way I understand your analogy. Like, how is that being defensive? You came up with it. I'm responding to it. I guess.
So I do want to address the point here, though, because I think we see this little line here where on the left side I have agreement with the atheist, and on the right side I have agreement with Stanley, a musician, and I think that line is a very important line because, in my opinion, it's the solution to the whole problem. Of course, otherwise I wouldn't be a Calvinist, right? Well, or otherwise I wouldn't have my position at least. Anyway, I think that when we're asking this question about, because when you're talking about the cheesecake, we're talking about from God's perspective, right? The cheesecake, is it better to have the cheesecake, or is it better to have the cheesecake with dirt on it? And you're saying that the analogy that was given by way of musician doesn't actually work because God doesn't need this dirt on the cheesecake in order to have greater appreciation for the cheesecake. And I completely agree with that. But where musician's analogy I think is apt is we do. And God has an intention for us and for his creation for these sorts of things to happen, which then brings us back to my initial
but
point.
What
right?
we want is irrelevant, or what this is the pushback I've been getting on the real problem of evil for years is I think a part of this is we exist, and most theists think, well, that's impossible without God, so therefore we got to make it fit. And so they will think, okay, God has morally sufficient reasons. There's a greater good. Everything's going to outweigh the badness, blah, blah, blah. Universalism, they come up, Molinism, they come up with all these ideas to make it fit. But there's another option here. An option is this version of God that you believe in may not exist. Problem solved.
That option doesn't comport to mentally and emotionally healthy individuals.
Okay, that's a pragmatic argument, and I appreciate that. I really do.
Well, okay.
But there's a lot of false beliefs that can be pragmatically beneficial.
Beliefs are flawed to begin with. Why would you want beliefs? Why would you want?
Hang on, though, because let me say, I think
you're operating in a very bizarre framework where your atheistic sensory perception can ever amount to any knowledge about anything, which you are.
Well, but when you have this point too,
so it's
you have this point too when you're saying like, okay, well, there is the morally sufficient reason and stuff like that. It's not even necessarily that I would like not give those arguments or something like that, right? Obviously, I've been saying as far as my beliefs on this. I think that God has an ultimately holy purpose for everything that He's doing, right? But the response that I think we get to that is incredibly important, because it's no longer that dealing with this issue of the problem of evil. In other words, it seems like that does suffice for the problem of evil. The question then shifts to, okay, are we saying that God has a level of like improvement upon Himself or something like that, or that he is a great desire for this or something? And I don't think that there is any way for us to say that there is an ought to in the moral sense or in the qualitative sense. It's just simply there's a being out there who desires to create as the world currently is. I would agree with Tested by Fire in a lot of instances as far as why. I think part of it's a great relationship with us, to have lessons for us so that we spiritually grow. There's a lot of theodicies that I think are both true at the same time.
Can I ask you, like, I never got a clear answer from you, I don't think. How would you answer this? Do you think God wants, wills, desires sin?
Look how you put 3 words.
You can choose any of one of those words. Put any synonym for those words you want in there. You know what I'm getting at.
I would say no.
Wait. Let me just
For the
respond
record,
to
I
this
say no.
real quick. I'm not even going to address the point because I think I did it multiple times already. Desire is personal to God. Stop making desire something that projects from God. It's personal to Him. It doesn't reach us.
Thanks, Stanley, but I'm asking CJ.
Okay, I just want to make define the words for a person who might be interested in actually using the proper terms to try to make portray or paint.
I understand you're trying to be biblical. I get it. That's commendable.
Basically, that's what we got.
Does God want? Is He okay? Does He desire? Does He will?
Let's hear from.
So let me answer the question though, because I think it's an important question. I think there is some sense in which the answer is ultimately yes. I think that God has the word I typically use is ordain, because that's the traditional language that's used in like Westminster Confession and stuff like that. But there is a sense in which God has, if God has ordained all things, that has to include also the bad things. Now, I think there's ways of explaining that. Like, for example, I think that there is the conflicting wills of authors, which are not contradictory to each other. Right? I kind of explain that whole thing. And of course, the question that ends up bringing up is a question of fictionality versus reality. And so we obviously do want to address that.
So how do you personally square that away with an all good being, desires, wills, wants, whatever word you want to use, not goodness in one sense?
And that's the problem. That's the problem, CJ.
I'm asking CJ.
Well, I'm talking to CJ as well. That's the problem. That's the problem that when you make a statement like that, saying that God ordains all things, then you find yourself with these problems where Pine Creek would have leverage over you. Because how would you respond to like Psalms 1 where it says though
Stanley, CJ is not insecure like you are. He's okay with me having leverage over him.
I know. Can I talk to CJ for a second? He doesn't need you to defend him. He could defend himself. I've debated him. I'm sure he knows that.
I wasn't offending you. I was trying to offend. I mean, I was trying to offend you, not CJ.
Yeah, no problem. So God knows the way of the righteous. He is the way, as opposed the way of the sinners leads to damnation. Are you saying that the way of the sinners or the wicked is something that He ordained? So that would mean that He led people to damnation. If you're saying that's something He ordained, that's Psalms 1. He knows the way of the righteous, and that leads to eternal life, and the way of the sinners or the wicked leads to damnation. So how would you be able to reconcile that with your understanding that God ordains all things? Because that would entail God ordained the way of the wicked, which leads to damnation.
So real quick, I'm going to answer you first, but I don't remember your question, Doug. So if you could pin it in your brain real quick so you could ask it to me again, I'd appreciate that. And thank you for your patience also.
Too bad Stanley interrupted.
I appreciate all you guys. This has been a very passionate conversation, but it's been good. So to answer your point, Stanley, I do think there is a sense in which God has ordained, like I said, all things. So that would include the bad things. My answer to like how would we square that with, for example, Psalm 1 talking about like His ways lead to righteousness and all that kind of stuff. I think there is. I had given this analogy earlier, but I guess you weren't here. I think there is when you create a story with characters in it, any kind. I think, including realities, which only God, of course, can do. there is, by nature of these narratives, a conflicting will in the author. Not a contradictory will, but there is one which appears to be in conflict with each other. So the villain is the will of the author, and we know that because the author wrote the villain, and he wrote his story arc, and he wrote the things he did, and all that kind of stuff. But also, the protagonist is the will of the author, and we know that because he's the protagonist, right? He's the guy on the good side who gets the girl in the end and all that other kind of stuff. Those two wills appear to be in conflict with each other, hence the conflict of the story, but they aren't actually in contradiction with each other because the purpose is the narrative. That's the goal, right? The goal is to have the story written as the story was initially concocted. So I think it's the same thing with God. I think, did God ordain evil things? Absolutely. Otherwise, they wouldn't happen. Does God will that we only do good things? Absolutely. Otherwise, he wouldn't tell us so. So how are those not in contradiction with each other? I think because the point of what God's trying to accomplish here is this story, and whatever the moral, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, of this story that we call reality actually is, which I decide to be vague about by just saying God has ordained all things for his own holy and righteous purposes, which does include us. I think all things work together for good for those who are called according to his purpose. So it's not just simply like self-glorification or ego trip or anything like that, although I think he will glorify himself, of course. But I think it's also with us in mind. He has, so like when you were saying, we have certain learning experiences by way of sin and stuff like that. Would completely agree. But
Hey, Doug, if you don't mind,
I need some
if you don't mind,
clarification.
Doug, putting your question on hold,
So let's see.
I can
If
jump
God
in here
is
before I leave.
self-glorifying, that would not be an ego
I'm
trip.
about to take off.
Let Converse speak.
Yeah, Doug, if you don't mind holding your question, I'll speak for just a minute. Well, just like in regards to what CJ just said, like I think that I don't know, I don't really like the conflicting views in the story perspective so much. But I sympathize with some of what he says. I consider myself reformed, right? But I'm not a Calvinist because I believe in libertarian freedom. And mixed with like middle knowledge as part of God's set of
Are you like Tim? What's his name?
omniscience.
That bald guy, that philosopher guy. You have his position.
Ken Keatley, you mean?
I'm thinking of the guy who's.
I think he's thinking of Tim Stratton.
Tim Stratton is what I was
Oh,
thinking of.
Tim. I thought you said. Well, I don't know. I don't know if I agree with him a lot. I mean, I like Kenneth Keathley. I like McGregor. There's a few others that I like as well, but either way, like I think that there is an ordination, right? But it's not without libertarian freedom. So, like for example, in Matthew chapter 23, verse 37, I want to say Christ is over Jerusalem, saying, "Jerusalem, Jerusalem, you who kill the prophets, how long did I wish to gather you together, like a hen gathers her chicks, but you were not willing." You is something they were not willing to do. Right now, I've heard all the Calvinists, you know, explaining of that, right? But coupled with God's not willing that anyone should perish and so forth, right? Like, I just think there are going to be too many. Deuteronomy chapter 30, Moses makes explicitly, he does like a reductio. He goes like, look, you can choose, right? You don't have to say who will ascend into heaven to get it for us that we may do it. He's like, it's in your very mouth. You don't have to cross the sea to go get it, that somebody can help you do it. You're capable. Like, he goes out of his way and so forth. But in regards to the problem of evil, I have like I talk about this like almost every day. It seems like Danny knows because he's on Clubhouse a lot. And I've talked to Danny about this plenty of times. But I found it interesting that Danny had Graham Oppie on the couple like a week ago or so, and Graham actually rejected the logical problem of evil. He actually said that he thought that it didn't actually go through, and he just thinks there's conceptions that work with it. And it's funny, he actually gave my view one very similar as an
But what
example.
you just said is very important. Conceptions that
And
go through with it, like specific gods. I think when he said that, he's talking about like a deistic type God.
no, he specifically gave my view. So see, the person who gives a logical problem, right? They have to show a contradiction, and to show a contradiction means that it has to necessarily be the case that there can't conceptually be an out. And so, That's why Oppie rejects it. He says, right? He's read the literature, and in the literature, there's just a lot of people reject the logical problem. Let me give you a view that I think
Well,
works. So,
I gave 3 outs, but the thing is, a lot of Christians don't want to take them.
yeah,
Oh, Doug,
it's not the only
you're
three.
triggering.
Yeah, it's not the only three, though, right? I mean, like, for example, you could take a conception where you just reject normativity. Like I talked to Jack Engstrack about this, right? And Jack was like, "Oh yeah, if you just reject normativity on this view with God, then this doesn't apply to you. This only applies to people who accept the normativity."
Then
What does
you're
it
just
mean by
rejecting evil.
normativity?
Then you're just
Um,
rejecting evil. You're conceding the
yeah,
argument by saying there's no evil.
yeah. If you just say that, like, I don't think evil has some. I don't think evil and good are both ontological, like
Oh,
things,
things.
right?
Yeah.
I think
Okay.
that evil is just a privation of good, and so in that
But you're still
case,
going to think that there are truths about them, right?
Yeah. It's
I
still
think there's
bad to
truth.
rape, right?
Yeah, I think there are truths about them in the world, right? So, but what you have to do is extrapolate that to the choices of God, right? And I do think that there's a range of options for God, as McGregor puts it, right? Within which there's a value range, let's say, that God has the freedom to choose. Now, the issue is going to be reconciling freedom in the world. So, libertarian freedom in the world, as McGregor puts it, kind of entails that God is at an epistemic distance in the world. And what that just means is if God is there in the world directly, he will overwhelm you to make the decision he wants you to make. In order to allow your freedom, morally significant freedom, he must be at an epistemic distance. You can think of it like a father standing over a child's shoulder, like,
Well, no,
choose
all
A or
this is
choose B.
irrelevant in my opinion,
I know, I
Converse.
know, I know it is, right?
Because who gives the free will in the first place? God,
yeah.
right?
Well, I know it's irrelevant in
Right.
your opinion, right?
Yeah,
Because
God
you
obviously determines what exhaustively determines what free will creatures will do. I mean, clearly.
No, I'm not
I
even
think
going that
you're
far.
kind of
I'm
missing
just
the point though, because that's Pine Creek is bringing up a really it's a defeater in my opinion.
Yeah, I know it
Because you
is.
just brought up Converse
Because you
that
reject my view.
Oh,
well,
if
it's
I
not
may,
even just
the
that. It's just
question.
the idea of libertarian free. If I grant you libertarian free will, which technically on a compatibilist view you could do, because there's varying definitions of what libertarian free will even means. But even assuming a libertarian free will, you still have the problem of God created this being. God knew what the being was going to do, and God could have created the being in a circumstance which led him to do something else. He also, of course, could have not created the being. Now,
Well, if
in
he
this
did that,
analogy I brought up, the only thing the
sorry.
being is doing is that which God allows the being to do, but he still knows what he's going to do, and he still knows how to put him in another situation
Yeah, I
such
just
that he
reject it.
won't do those things. But he doesn't.
Yeah, I just reject the fatalist
How are
view.
you addressing what Converse said?
Disagree.
Because he brought a good point. Converse brought a good point that evil is not a concrete thing, but instead it's depriving yourself from goodness, right? So if
Hunger's not a
everything,
concrete thing, but if I deprive you of food, then we still have, you know what I mean? Like
good
it
point.
doesn't follow. It could be
Yeah,
either
I
deprivation
wasn't
view of
finished.
evil.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to lay out like a more robust view that kind of answered some of these questions. Like,
So far, it's answered nothing.
no,
well, so,
he brought a good point.
yeah,
If you take into account what he said about evil being something is depriving
No,
yourself
you
of
just
goodness.
changed. You just changed. Use a different
Wait,
word.
Let Converse finish. Let
Yeah,
Converse finish.
I'm just about to let him continue. I just wanted to make sure people understand the point that he just established, that evil is by definition depriving yourself from goodness. So that is something I think
Okay,
CJ
so
Cox.
from now on, we'll say deprivation of good, but it still doesn't
Okay,
change anything.
and I was trying to address CJ Cox. That's what you need to put it into your equation, because I think that's a good point he's bringing. Because you're saying if God created Lucifer in a different way, that would mean that he would not
Stanley.
freely choose to deprive himself from goodness, or any other being would not freely choose to deprive themselves
Go
from
ahead,
goodness.
Converse.
Basically, you would have a problem with free will.
yeah, and look, I don't expect anybody to accept my conception, right? Like, we're talking about these things as if they're all just transparent, but like a lot of philosophers talk about opacity or like the opaqueness of some of the concepts that people use, right? And so sometimes philosophers just reject whole views because they're like, we're talking about this as if it's transparent when it's not. Chris Tweet just had a thing about this, an article I put
Can
out
you
about
do me a
this.
favor and stop
But whenever,
mentioning people's names and just
no, I
say what you
can't.
believe?
No, I can't, Pine Creek. I know that you don't cite scholarship. You just go based off what you personally want to be the case. But I actually like to cite sources in case somebody's interested. But I know that harms you because your
Getting spicy in here.
ADHD is
No,
so.
no, it just
No.
takes
Stop
time that
interrupting.
doesn't need
Why
to
am
be
I?
there.
Sorry. Why am I being interrupted? All right. I know your ADHD is very high. Like
I don't have
I don't know
ADHD.
if it's your Adderall or whatever, but you need to
I
just
don't take
chill.
Adderall.
I know you don't like nuance. You like very quick. Here's this contradiction.
Let's get back
Let's
to the
get to
point.
the point.
Issue is-
Get to the point,
Well, then,
Converse.
wait. If we want to get to the point, why are you interrupting me? Is the question.
Go,
Okay. So if you wanted to
please.
get to the point, you would stop interrupting. So the point is that on my conception, it's just going to be the case that God is the only intrinsically perfect being, meaning complete in every respect, that can exist. And given the fact that God can create something, it's going to be the case that it's going to tend toward what I'm called disorder, right? It's not going to be in perfect order because it's going to lack one of the great making properties. So you can think of lying. If you're not perfect in honesty, you're going to eventually lie or steal or something like this because you lack in some department. Now, when it comes to this view about the God's perfect, if he creates a world, it's going to entail that there's less perfection or something. Would you say that's, I don't want to strawman the view. Is that what you're asking?
No, I'm
Like,
asking you.
that's one of the questions.
No, here's the question. Do you believe God knows the future with certainty?
Wait, that's not one of the questions you ask?
No.
Oh, wait, you didn't ask that if God creates a world that he's lessening the perfection or something? Or the
Well,
goodness?
I did ask the question about which world's better,
Well, I'm pretty sure you said what I just said.
but can I ask you questions now?
Well,
Just assume they're new ones. Do you believe God knows the future with certainty?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, that's going to depend, but I would say so, yes.
Does God like sin, desire sin, will sin, okay with sin? You choose any of those words you want. You get
Yeah.
the idea.
Yeah, God does not like sin. Yes, he permits sin for a greater good. What is your point?
Okay. So God, before he creates, he's looking at a world of just himself or a world with himself plus creation, which includes sin.
Mm-hmm.
Which of those two worlds is better to you?
So that's exactly what I just asked you, and you went through this roundabout way to get back to saying basically you should have just
Which
said
of those
yes.
two worlds is better to you?
Wait, you should have just said yes to my question, right?
Okay,
that
sure.
is what you.
Which of the two worlds is
So
better
why
to
are you
you?
trying to make this hard?
There's other factors, Jeff, besides just
Forget
whether
about
it's sin or
gotchas.
not. Maybe there's another factor that God sees.
Look,
So here's my question, Converse. Which of
just
those two
forget about
worlds
the
is better to
gotchas.
you?
Use your mind and think, okay? Look, I talk all the time to atheists about this that are very smart, okay? I was talking to Rhodey the other day, right? And we were talking about this problem. And he agrees, as an atheist is very informed, that when God creates a world, okay, it's not doing anything to the value of goodness or perfection that God has.
Which of the two worlds are better?
It's external.
The equally good. We already
I'm
answered
asking
that.
Converse.
Oh,
Yeah.
Wait,
So
you're saying a perfect God creates imperfect worlds? No.
I
That doesn't
disagree
make
with that
sense.
as well. God doesn't create anything that's imperfect.
Converse answer my question? You got a world with God alone, perfection,
yeah,
and a world with God plus creation, with includes sin. Which world's better?
The world with God and plus creation still has God perfection, right?
That wasn't my question. My question is which world is better?
Look, I don't accept your premise that the two worlds are together like that, right? It's just your conception of these two worlds are
Was there
that.
ever? There was once God
What do you mean by
alone,
better?
right?
What do you mean by better?
You can define better any way you want.
No. Are you meaning that normatively? You're the one asking the questions.
Good point.
I mean,
good point.
If you could have a world of God alone is perfect, can you get better than God?
Better?
Yeah.
No, you can't get better than perfection.
You can't get better than perfection. So that means a world with God plus creation is not better than the world of God alone. Do you agree?
No, I don't agree with you.
That seems to be an entailment, though, Converse.
Yeah, that Converse.
Sorry.
That was bad. I don't know.
No, that's
What do
like
you mean
saying
by that?
infinity times one.
I'll ask my question again. You said you can't get better than perfection, right?
Yeah.
A world with God alone, you can't get better than, right?
Yes. Well,
So-
look, I'm not accepting your conception of the worlds. Is what I'm trying to tell you, and neither do a lot of other people. Whenever you say, when God creates a world that can tend toward disorder, right? All you're saying is that is the world with God in perfection state and a world external to God that is not in a perfection state, is that worse than just God in a perfection state? God doesn't grow any less perfect given any creation.
Correct.
Okay.
I agree.
Okay. So I think that's the entailment that you have to draw, is that it actually changes.
So let me ask my question again.
In the nature of God normatively.
Is a world with God plus creation better than a world with God alone?
Yes.
Is the
No.
world? Yeah, I don't accept that.
How can you don't accept my question?
God's
What do you mean-
perfection is iterated
what do you-
in his creation. It's an extension of him.
Look, what do you mean by better?
Is infant God better than
Okay,
toddler
I'll
God?
use your own language, Converse. You said God is perfect. Can you get better than perfect?
No.
You said no. Can a world with God plus creation get better than God alone?
Those aren't two different things. They're actually the same thing.
Yeah.
Can
That's
a
what it
world
is.
with God plus creation get better than a world with God alone?
Two different ways
You
of saying the same
You
thing.
can't get better.
Basically, what you're saying is
What?
like,
What'd you say?
It's just two different ways
I just
of saying
repeated the same thing
thing.
I've been saying. Yeah, like I
Yeah.
just think that you're being incredulous.
Danny, do you
You're-
understand
you're-
why a lot of theists
Yeah,
just
I'm
refuse to
having-
answer that
I don't
question?
know.
You're asking, is infinity
Let me-
plus one bigger
Let
than
me ask the
infinity?
questions on Doug's behalf.
Listen,
You
okay.
have a notion, converse of perfection. Presumably, it's normative, right? And you can
Well,
extrapolate a
no,
concept.
I don't think so.
What do you mean? Okay, so
You're asking the question, is infinity
by
plus
perfect, you
one
don't mean
bigger than infinity?
all good.
Well, Jack seems to think that it's not a normative notion.
Is
Well, I'm
infinity
asking
plus
you.
one bigger than infinity?
I think
point is
musician
that
is trying
you
to
can
make a point.
extrapolate the notion of better if you have a concept of perfection.
That's why I say if you reject the normativity, right, of God's prior to creation, then as Jack says, this argument isn't against you, because look,
Okay, but I'm asking you. So I don't care what Jack says. I care about what
Okay.
what you think. Okay. Do
Mhm.
you think that the world, the state of affairs prior to creation, is normatively all good?
normatively all good. I don't
there-
think. I think that
You have to say
God. I
yes.
think that God is perfect in every attribute. I don't take normativity in the sense that you're using it.
What's the sense that I'm using it?
Well, you're using it in some type of like, like by normative, are you using like a Bill Grommy sense, or are you just meaning like a moral sense?
Because you don't know how I'm using it, but you said that I'm using it differently.
Well, I'm asking you to clarify.
Well, presumably, okay, let's just frame it in terms of God's desires, right? Is the state of affairs, with it's just God, a perfectly desirable to God?
Is the state of affairs with just God perfectly desirable?
Mm-hmm.
Question makes no sense at all.
Yeah, I
That's
don't know
an
what that
asinine
even
question.
means.
Wow.
You don't
What
know
does
what
that
it
mean?
means to say. Do you know what it means to say desirable?
It's perfectly desirable.
You're
Meaning
personifying
that
God. Why are you personifying God?
does God not have desires?
No, why are you Danny? Why are you
I
personifying?
don't reject God having desire. right?
Presumably, God is a person, right? Or set of
Like,
persons,
yeah.
whatever you want to
No,
say.
personification doesn't mean person in like the philosophical sense. It means like why you're humanizing God.
In what way?
You're saying when you say does God desire X, what you're implying is like the same way that you desire a piece of chocolate cake. Does God desire what? It's
Do you
like
think God has
no.
desires?
He's a
Can I
transcendent being.
can I answer Danny's
No,
question?
Chandler,
real
you're
quick?
gonna
God is a
confuse everything.
transcendent being, Danny. Do you not realize that?
So God doesn't have desires.
Well, God
Yes, he
has
does. Yes,
desires
he
in a
does.
way.
Yes, he does.
Wait,
Yes,
can
he does.
things exist outside of your comprehension? Yes or no?
Sure.
Like, have you ever heard of the novel Flatland, where like you're living on a 2D plane and you're trying to access a 3D object and you never really get the full picture of it?
Sure. I don't look. I don't understand
and
things.
so they
Like,
try to
presumably, I
describe.
thought Christians. Presumably, I thought Christians thought that God desires things. I guess you don't.
Well,
Yes,
no,
he
it's
does.
not.
He does.
Undefined variables are
He does.
unacceptable.
No, but you're trying to describe something that's obviously transcendent of our own limited sensory perception in an extremely oversimplified, personified way. It's like, well, I can't desire chocolate cake and also desire not to gain calories, so God can't exist. It's like, yeah, okay, I guess these little like semantic tricks
What have I
are
said that's
fun.
disagreeable? What have you? What are you disagreeing with me about?
Your demonstration of can God desire things?
Demonstration. I've only asked questions.
Well,
Converse has
okay,
already conceded that he's okay with that
Sunflower,
language.
your
don't go down this
question-
rabbit hole.
your
Yes, God
question about
desires.
can God desire things is confined to anyone answering the question to how we experience desire, and that's so it's a flawed question to begin with.
Look,
No,
it comes down
Yeah,
to
I don't
this.
think this
You
is
have
really
to be
getting
able to.
anywhere, but I do want to point out this is the exact same problem we were running into earlier. It's just sort of a different trail on the path, so to speak, right? Because when we ask the question, now I think that you ultimately force yourself into a Calvinist bubble by getting here, anyways. But let's just assume that's not true and get here. When you ask the question, God desires to create this world and it has all this sin, but he doesn't like sin. Is a world with God or a world without, or with God, no creation, or a world with God and creation better? And you have somebody like Stanley, and I would agree with this, say, I don't think it necessarily matters. In other words, it's neither is lesser or greater than the other. There is a reason for that. And the reason ultimately is, I think it kind of comes from what Danny's question is asking here. God does have desires. It's not qualitatively better or worse, right, in any sort of way, but it is simply that God desires to have this kind of a world in the same way that you would desire to have one flavor of cereal.
This is
over
what I
another.
don't understand, CJ, is because how can even let's get rid of the normative sense of good and evil, but just say, but do it in the terms of, okay, we have goodness with God alone, and creation introduces the deprivation of good, right? How can deprivation of good be on equal footing as
Good question. Let me address that real quick. I won't take too much time. So before creation, everything is perfect. God is good. After creation, he creates everything is good, and then sin came into the world. So how is it both equals footing, right? Well, God is supreme. His will is he's sovereign before creation, and he's sovereign after creation, even with evil in this world. Why? Because his will supersede every evil in this world. So at the end, the end result is God reigning supreme, his sovereignty, and having a plan of salvation being fulfilled. So either world is good because he reigns, he's sovereign in both of them. So that is a nice response to your question. So which world is better? God before creation, he's sovereign. God after creation with evil, he's still sovereign. His will be.
I understand that. I agree with you.
Okay, so that's an easy way to answer your question.
But it still doesn't solve the issue of we have this thing called sin, the deprivation of good, which God doesn't like.
Which will be
we
defeated.
Also have Jesus Christ, the Word, which is the
right. So this is the greater good argument, right? This is basically saying everything will be made right at the end, right?
No, not saying? Greater.
Yeah, well,
same
and
result.
I would say too.
I'm just finalize. Same result. It's like what I was saying before, and what Magician was trying to say. Infinite plus one is the same thing as infinite. Perfect, him being sovereign before creation, is the same thing as him being sovereign in a world that is deprived or with sin, because at the end result is him being sovereign and being victorious. So it's the same thing. There's not one that's better than the other. He is sovereign in both worlds.
Yeah, I'm not denying
that. I think too, ultimately, the when you ask like, how can a world with deprivation of good be equal to a world that's completely good?
Yeah.
I think that God is separated entirely from his creation. So for him, nothing gets greater or lesser. He's just perfect in his perfect state. But for us, there is something that can be achieved here by the existence of negative things.
Yes, agreed.
You meant it for evil. I meant it for good.
I think the whole thing can be framed in terms of God's desires and what success and failure with respect to God's desires. Here's the idea: you have a system where all of God's desires are satisfied, and then you have a system where some of them are unsatisfied. It just seems like the world where God's desires are all met with success, right, is going to be the one that he prefers over a world where his desires are met with failure by definition.
There's no failure to desires. Wait, real quickly, because I think I said it at least 10 times. Desire is personal to God, so there is no failure or success as it relates to that. What you can qualify as success or failure is him fulfilling his will. His will is what's being projected. His will is what's being manifest in time and space. That is the desires. Desires are personal to him. So if you're going to argue,
that's a really important point too, because this remember when I was talking earlier about this, when we're talking about is a world without sin or whatever, however you guys had phrased it, but which is better, God or God plus creation. When we're talking about this idea of getting better, that is, unless you're talking about strictly the desires of the person, which I think is true. God creates simply because he desires to create. But that's not like a qualitative thing. There's no, and this is why I use that example of the sugary cereals versus the one where you have a sugary cereal and a healthy cereal. If you get the healthy cereal, there's qualitative benefit of being healthier, maybe getting proper fiber in your diet or whatever, right? But if you're talking about just two sugary cereals of equal health value, the only thing that is different even is what you desire. And in that sense, God certainly desired a world with creation more than he desired a world without creation. I would freely grant that to the atheist. But if somebody were to say, okay, so is a world with creation better than a world without creation? I think that at that point we're talking about something different, because we're talking about like,
CJ, listen to what you just said. You said God desired a world with sin more than a world without sin. That's basically what you said.
Well, and there's a manner of speaking in which I think that's true, in the sense that God desired it to go this way rather than some other way, right? So in a way, I wouldn't even necessarily reject that. I think God has ordained all things, that includes.
But here's the contradiction. If you believe God does not desire sin, and he desired to create a world with sin, you have a contradiction.
And you see, CJ, how you allowed him again? Notice how he was not able to. Okay.
The desire here is, and this is, I think where I would kind of emphasize those conflicting quote unquote wills, right? The desire ultimately is for a holy purpose. So if we have a God who does not like sin, he hates sin, but he likes whatever it is that he's going to accomplish more than he dislikes sin, then sin existing so that we could get to the point he likes could be reasonable and rational. And so we could say he's decreed all sin, he's decreed all these bad things, he's ordained all these bad things to get to that end goal, which is, and then the question is just, what is that end goal? What is the purpose? What's the theodicy, right? I think there's multiple. I think
this is a greater good argument.
Basically, yeah.
But that's not biblical, CJ. That's not biblical.
I would disagree with that, because I think the text says a lot of things that seem to indicate this is exactly kind of what God is doing. Like, so for example, there's Isaiah 45:7. People argue about whether or not it says evil or calamity. I don't really care, because I don't think it makes a difference. But it says,
it's not evil. The word is not evil.
Create darkness, make peace, and create calamity. Let's just call it calamity and not evil. Yes. He says he creates it, right? Yes. So he creates hurricanes and
like the flood. Yeah, like the flood.
Yeah, exactly. But those things are part of what causes all of our great suffering here, right?
No, but that's not evil. You're trying to qualify that as something that's evil. Judgment of God is not evil. It's righteous.
Well, I don't think the judgment of God is evil, but those things happening are certainly, we'll de-emphasize the word here and use it. They're bad, right? In a perfect world, there is nobody drowning in a flood or dying of bone cancer at the age of 3, right? In a perfect world, those things don't happen.
To a murderer, getting caught is evil to them, right?
Hey, so that's a fair point, but let me ask you a question. Let's say that we're whatever we do, we execute
Why
the
is that
criminal, we put him in prison, whatever it happens to be. We beat him, right? Whatever. Are beatings, kidnapping people and throwing them in boxes, or executions good?
If God says so.
No.
See, Stanley, I think now, granted, Doug, you are right in a very
See?
serious sense, but Stanley's answer there is the correct answer. The answer is no. Beatings aren't good. Executions aren't good.
What?
All these
What
things
about
aren't
what
good.
if it's for the greater good, CJ?
See,
No, that's
we're getting exactly to where I'm trying to go here, right?
Yeah.
What if it's for the greater good? That's why we do it, is because there is a greater good here, right? It's better for, depending on what your different views are on punishment, I think punishment is punitive purely. I don't believe in rehabilitative punishment.
Okay, you're talking about punishment, a righteous punishment. I agree. Righteous punishment is good. Yeah, go.
Well,
go
no.
ahead.
Hey,
Scripture tells us what man means for evil that God uses for good, but you're making it as if it's
no,
not.
you're missing the point here, really quick, though, right? The point is that beatings are bad, but
No, I disagree. God says discipline your children. It's not a bad thing. It says the person who does
discipline your children because they're bad, though. That's my point, right? In a perfect world, there's no beatings.
Have you beat your children today, Stanley?
I don't have children, but I got beat up, and it was a good thing. It was a good thing for me.
But I think you're still kind of missing the point, though, right? It's like if everything was working perfectly, there would nobody would ever be beaten because there'd be no reason to discipline a child because he would just know.
I agree.
Right?
But that's interesting. If everything was perfect, so you're saying that, including the world where there's God in creation, not everything is perfect, right?
Yes, it's a sinful world. We know that already.
God can't make something.
But prior to creation, everything was perfect. So the change is a negative one.
Yes.
It's a lesser perfect.
And Danny, all these guys know that. But
No,
they
no,
haven't
you have,
found a
no,
way to
I don't.
consolidate.
Wait, don't count me
Yes.
on that. I'm
But-
the one that believes in open theism. I think you can create moral agents that do extra good.
Yeah,
So-
I admit open theism is I think the only one of the solutions to the problem of evil.
But again, God's
Fair enough.
God's will is gonna supersedes all the evil. Again, I said it. The end result is God winning, being victorious. So even if there's evil in this world, at the end, He's victorious.
Look, you got three options. You got either there was an improvement, it was positive, it was either negative, or it was neutral. No,
Okay, so
What
what
about
about
negative, neutral?
what?
Wait,
Let me respond to that real quickly. Let me respond to that quickly. God
say
is
it.
perfect. He's eternal. So His will is eternal. So you're basically saying infinite plus one is different than infinite. It's the same thing. It's the same result. Goodness before creation.
Are you saying positive, negative, or neutral?
I'm saying it is the same result.
That's neutral.
Yeah,
That would be
that's not
neutral.
the answer. Is it positive,
Danny.
negative, or neutral?
Neutral. His answer
Okay,
is neutral.
if
Neutral.
that's what neutral is, yeah, neutral.
All right, so then there is no explanation for why there's creation rather than not, because it's a neutral.
Because God willed it.
Wait a second.
Because God willed it.
Danny,
Because
let me
God-
respond to this. This is
Because
beautiful.
God willed it.
This is
That's
beautiful.
that's
Let
the
me-
reason.
please. Danny, so now it's no longer a contradiction or an issue. It's just, I don't know, there's no explanation for it? Okay.
Yeah, because
what?
if the idea is that the two states of affairs
That's no big
are
deal.
equally good, that means God has no reason
But
to
that's not a
create
big
one
deal.
rather than. Wait, let me finish.
That is such an
If the
easy
two worlds,
obstacle.
if the two worlds are equally good, then
Yes.
there's no reason to choose one over the other.
And
Right.
that's your ultimate contention is like, I
No,
guess
musician.
because
The
of
problem
both.
with
Wait.
here is
I have to respond to this. This is amazing.
I'm going to answer your question. It's neutral. If you answer neutral, then you have a problem. You can't use the greater good argument anymore.
Fine. No,
That's
forget
it.
the great,
Yeah,
forget all
forget the
that.
greater good.
I really want to focus on this. So now it's no longer a contention with anything else. It's just, well, why would you do something if it's the same as the other thing?
And that's a good
No,
thing,
I'm saying
magician.
that God,
Magician, you know,
When
you
God-
see- wait.
God-
let me say something to the magician. Notice how now we have destroyed their contradiction argument. Now they're left. Oh, why did he choose one over the other?
Yeah,
That's
which is
we
that's
cornered
just-
them.
I'm
And
saying
now they're in
that if
checkmate. Now they're
yeah,
in checkmate.
like that's
Yeah,
a silly
You're
question.
just misunderstanding the disagreement. We're saying there's a contradiction if there's a positive or negative change.
Okay,
If you're saying there's no positive or negative change,
right.
then God's decisions are random. They has no.
Well,
you're here
if
purely
that-
by
if you
chance.
thi- okay.
Wait 1 second. I'm not done.
Okay.
You're here purely by chance. There's no reason why you exist.
How so?
Right. So
Because
in
the
the
world
way,
where Sunflower exists and the world where he doesn't exist are equally good. There's no reason to choose one rather than another.
maybe
Okay, just
God
because-
didn't choose
just
one.
because
Wait,
they're
wait,
equally-
Danny. What
Wait,
makes you
wait.
think God chose one and not the other? Maybe they both exist simultaneously.
Wait, do you exist and don't exist at the same time?
No, God as a supernatural transcendent being can exist in a realm free of his creation, and the realm of his creation
The
can
multiverse,
also
Danny.
exist.
Do you exist?
No, hold on a second. You have to realize what you're saying here now, because I know there's going to be a lot of frantic, frenetic sort of devices now introduced, but all you're saying is, if A equals A, then why do anything? It's like, okay, that I don't know, I don't care.
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that none of God's decisions are going to be informed by a reason. That's what I'm saying. If you think they're equal, but every
Maybe
possible
they're not
world is
decisions at
equally
all.
good.
Maybe they're just extensions of God himself.
Yeah, but musician, I think you have forfeited the right to say the phrase morally sufficient reasons.
That too.
Wait, why?
See, I would disagree
Wait,
with that.
if your
because-
answer is wait, why? You do not understand what Danny's saying.
Okay, fine. Can you explain it to me?
Well, I think that
There's
no
I think I
reason
would
to choose
disagree
one.
because
I'm trying
the
to
greater
engage.
good is for us and us alone, but not for God. Because and that's the thing. Like the neutrality is for God Himself. He doesn't add anything or take away anything from Himself, right? But within creation, for us, there is a greater good because of X, Y, and Z that's actually happening, and in the end, I think it ultimately glorifies Him.
You see,
So
see
when
the
you say
difference?
I still think it's like the weakest argument ever to be like, well, we why would you ever do something if it's
Wait,
just
wait,
as
wait,
good as the other?
magician.
Wait, do you
magician.
believe that you're here?
Cares?
Do you believe that you're here for a reason rather than not?
Danny, who cares? You know that this is a silly question, dude.
Because
Because
answer
like
the question. If it's
you
silly, you
can't-
can answer it.
no, I think it's a very silly question. I
Yes,
can't
it's silly. You can answer it.
I can't dignify it with a response
You
because
can't answer a silly question.
okay, the point is I don't have to justify the reasoning of God.
I'm not
As
saying
long
that
as
you
there's-
have
if
to.
there's
I'm
no
just asking, do you think
contradiction-
you're here for a reason? Yes or
If
no?
there's no contradiction, then there's no problem.
Yes,
I'm
we
about
are
to share
here
the
for a
contradiction,
reason.
right?
We're here for the glory of God.
I know you. I've heard you talk to other Evo atheists, and you said, "Oh, y'all think we're just here randomly? Like y'all think there's no purpose and no meaning and all this?"
Yeah.
That is
no.
actually your
Musician feels
view if
trapped,
you
so he's not
believe
gonna
that
answer
both
it.
worlds are equally good.
No, if
Magician.
I have faith in a supernatural being, I don't need to think to myself,
Magician. Scripture says we're created for His glory. Simple. It's a simple
I know.
response.
I
Just respond to it.
Yeah.
He has no
If
argument
that's
against
the
that.
case, then suddenly it's a positive change. It's no longer a neutral. change.
You can't positive
No.
something
Look,
that's
but
already perfect.
again, there's a separation
Hold on a
between.
second.
Wait,
it's-
CJ.
Hang on.
This is ridiculous. They know, Danny. You know.
So, hang on. Let's pause for a minute because there's a lot of
Because
overtalk
of your
right
own
now. I'm
axiom.
not going to say. I'm going to say what I was
for
going
our
to say.
sake.
And
Yeah,
just a
because
second,
of your
Joey.
own axioms,
Hang on,
you
hang
see
on.
why this is
Guys,
silly. That's why
Guys,
it's
just
so
a sec.
it's so
Just a
triggering.
sec. Just a sec. There's no way anybody's understanding what's going on right now. So Stanley, musician, Danny, Kelvy, Doug, me. Let's do that. Stanley, go ahead.
All right, thanks. So what we have established, because CJ Cox, hopefully you're paying attention to what's going on.
What about me?
Yeah, you could go, but notice how they were stuck once we neutralized their argument by suggesting that there was nothing that was improved before creation or after creation. Perfection in God's sovereign will before creation. Likewise, after creation, He is sovereign. He will be victorious at the end. So evil has no impact as it relates to that. I brought an equation. Infinite is the same thing as infinity plus one. Same thing. So now they're stuck on this point where they're suggesting, okay, so why we're here randomly? No, we're here because we were created for the glory of God. Now, how is that problematic? I don't know. I would like to know what argument they can make against that. The fact that God created us for His glory, and the fact that He created us for His glory does not increase or diminish from God's perfect nature. So that's what they need to respond to. They have to address the point directly, not just come with a whole bunch of things that's irrelevant. And CJ Cox, when you're, I'm finalizing with this statement. When you're saying that there was some type of evil is necessary to bring some better result or something like that, you're basically giving them an opportunity to argue against you and argue against God. Because now you're saying God is somehow, how can I say, lacking in that regard. So that's the problem that you're with Calvinism, in my opinion.
All right. I just noticed the original order was not going to be fair. So Danny, then musician, then Doug.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be brief. It's either that there's a positive change, which means that you're appealing to a reason why God did actualize one world rather than another, making the other world less good. There's a negative change, so God changed things and it was actually worse off than before. Or there's a neutral change, meaning that God created. There's not a reason why God created one over another. For if there were, then you'd go back to the positive change. So if you're appealing to God's glory or morally sufficient reasons or greater good stuff, you go back to the positive change answer rather than the neutral change.
Is it me?
Musician, then you, and then we'll go Kelby A's. I'm gonna go last.
Okay, yeah. So I think that really, frankly, I really don't think Danny was really prepared for the response of that it was a neutral change. And I think that what happened after that was the response was that the entire argumentation changed from sort of attempting to expose contradictions of some sort, or at least like problems, and then it completely shifted into like questioning like motivated reasoning, right? Like there's a difference there, because you can point out a contradiction, which is what Doug was actually doing pretty effectively, and saying like, well, you can't have sin if it's bad. How would you desire? And so essentially it went from pointing out contradictions to then saying, well, if it's neutral, then why bother? And that is, I think, it's just such a weak argument, because it's like you can just sort of simply shrug it off the same way science does. Like, like you don't really have to provide an explanation for the why, as long as there's no entailed contradiction. I don't really think it's strong to sort of start saying, well, why did he do it then? It's I don't know. To me, that's not really a sort of a strong response.
All right, Doug, go ahead.
If you're a Christian who believes that God doesn't want people to be destroyed, if you are a Christian who believes that God wants people to find life, then you have a problem, because God created a world where in Matthew 7, verse 13, it says, "Enter by the narrow gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and there many go in it. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that which leads to life, and there are few who find it." God created a world where he knew with 100% certainty, if you believe in omniscience, which musician doesn't, or at least not in that sense, that God created a world where he knew most will be destroyed and very few will be saved. He could create a world where there's no people. No one would have been destroyed if God didn't create. He created a world where most will be.
Better to have
Kelby?
loved and lost than to have never loved at all. Just kidding. Sorry.
Kelby, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I don't know where I'm gonna really go with that. Again, there's still a lot of assumptions as far as what I think somebody did bring up the privation of evil, which is what I had brought up as far as good and evil not necessarily being two opposing things, but rather one of them being the privation. But again, I think it's also a good point as far as the motivation of God and questioning why God would do such a thing. It seems to also presume that he is doing it for his own sake and not for our sake, because there also seems to be a lot of presumptions that, again, free will isn't actually a thing, which is where a lot of these, where I think a lot of these arguments are coming from, is that it's already begging the question that free will isn't a thing, and that there must be some other explanation. And there's also a lot of this is being approached as if there was some other way that God could have done it, as if God could have created free will beings that weren't, that did not have the potential to be evil, and have that not be a contradiction. But I don't think that that's a limitation of God. I think the limitation would be God to be capable of contradicting himself or doing something illogical. But I don't know where that gets us, so I'll just leave it with that.
A's, you had some comments. Go ahead. Kind of cutting out.
He's making out with his girlfriend.
We're going to pause for a moment on A's. Jamie, if you have some comments, go ahead. A's, as soon as you get your mic and stuff figured out.
Yeah, I just think you should surrender your dirty cakes to God.
Is that a euphemism?
Jamie's got a very dry and sarcastic sense of humor that you'll get it eventually if you're around here. But
oh, I get it, and I like it
for sure. So I think that ultimately, when we're talking about, is it better, is it worse, is it neutral? From the perspective of God in His existence, whatever that means, I would say that it is neutral because nothing is added or taken away from Him, right? But I think there's a very serious neutral explanation for the why, and it's the one that I've been presenting, which is that simply that He desires one over the other. Because there's plenty of times where we can desire one thing over the other. The cereal example was the one I gave, but there's many others we could all think of where we desire one thing over the other. And what causes that desire is nothing necessarily beneficial to us or making anything better. We're not morally improved by eating one thing over the other. We're not intellectually improved. At least I don't know if any science says that so far. Healthily improved, so far, so on and so forth. But we have a desire to taste one and not the other, right? And I think there's the same sense in which we have the creation here. God desires for us to go through this creation in the way that He has set forth so far, thus ordaining all things to be as they are. But for Him, He is morally, intellectually, logically, anything else you might say, sufficient in His own right and in and of Himself. Asher ayah asher, as it says in the Bible, I am that I am. And nothing is added to Him by creating a creation, nor would anything have been taken away from Him if He had not had a creation. Although you could, I guess, throw one little, you could say, monkey wrench into this, just to say that God manifests His attributes through a creation. So for example, God is the judge, but if there's nothing to judge, then obviously you're not a judge in the efficacious sense of the word. So creation does allow Him to manifest certain attributes of Himself in that way. And we can say maybe that's why He desires one thing over the other. But had He not manifested His righteous judgment, would it still be true that any judgment He made would be righteous? I think it would. It's just something that was never actualized. Since there was a couple theists in a row, we'll go ahead and let Danny or Doug, whoever wants to jump on first, give some comment.
Well, I think back now. If I could, I don't know if you want to go back to me.
Yeah, actually, we'll go ahead and let you go since I did skip over you, and then we'll go to Danny or Doug.
All right. Well, I think my comment be similar to musician in that is it a contradiction to think that an all-loving, omnipotent, omniscient God could create reality as we observe it, which clearly includes suffering and evil? And no, it's not a contradiction. And even if it seems like it, we have to recognize we are limited beings, limited by our sense perceptions. We have a lack of knowledge of the totality of creation, even of our physical world and universe. And if there is a God, that means there's a spiritual kingdom or reality which we cannot perceive. So we cannot know all aspects of the totality of reality. So God works in mysterious ways, and as long as there's no logical contradiction, we're fine. So yeah, God has not been refuted by suffering or evil.
Danny or Doug, whichever wants to jump on. We had a lot of different theists go in a row.
Thanks for having me on. I think I'm going to take off.
Bye, Pancake.
Yeah, absolutely. Always welcome. It's always nice to have conversations with you. I'd like to have a one-on-one at some point because I feel like it might be very edifying. But if you're up to that,
Yeah, we agree on so many things. It's just it's weird how we agree with the steps, but the end result we have differences.
Well, I have often said that fundamentalism, which is at its heart a Calvinistic wing, people don't remember that anymore, but all the original fundamentalists came out of Princeton Seminary and were Presbyterians. But anyway, in my opinion, fundamentalism is the only consistent form of religious expression. And one of the reasons I claim stuff like that is because fundamentalists like myself tend to have a lot of agreement with everybody everywhere when it comes to the logical things. It's the matters of belief that tend to separate us. And for the most part, there's very few questions that actually cause difference there. But which I think is good because it's an honest pursuit of truth. But anyways,
I do think that if you're going to solve the problem of evil and you want to remain a theist, you have to become an open theist. Danny, do you agree
I
with
don't
that?
know if that's going to work because there's still going to be evil currently happening that he knows about.
Right, but you can
not necessarily.
It might solve your problem of evil, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It solves
okay.
my problem of evil, of why God created in the first place. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
How do you know there's necessarily evil happening in open theism?
But anyhow, that's I find open theism fascinating, to be honest.
How do you know there's evil occurring unless you're the one committing it?
Well, don't open theists say that God knows what's knowable?
Well, sure, but I'm confused by Danny's contention there. He's like saying like there's still evil happening currently. Like, what do you?
Doesn't God know that people are being abused and all that?
I would say God knows all things as they are.
Yeah. So if there are currently people lying, cheating, being abused, God knows about that.
How is that? Well, I mean, that's a weird assumption. Like,
do you believe that though?
No, I don't understand things as evil if the person, like, you would have to know that a party experiencing this is like understanding it as permanently.
Oh, that's interesting. Are you saying that God, since God hasn't experienced this evil, he doesn't really see it as evil?
I don't even think we experience a lot of the stuff that happens to us as evil. Like, even though other people might, right? Like, because when you look at other people, you see things they go through. You go, that poor thing. They go, what do you mean?
Okay, for example, thou shalt not take the Lord God's name in vain. God understands that. Does he hear people take his name in vain?
Yeah, well, God understands motivations, and again,
but if he hears it, he knows it's happening, right?
Yeah, if he knows,
and he could. And so what Danny's getting at is he could have stepped in to influence.
Oh well, I disagree with that because that the way. Okay, maybe I misunderstood what Danny was saying. I was thinking of evil as in like infliction of like suffering on other people in terms of like, acting out against the Lord.
What shouldn't be done? What shouldn't happen?
Well, what would be the issue with that in open theism?
Oh, because the open theism is the part of. I mean, depends on what kind of open theist you are, but I'm assuming that, based on the open theist I know, that there are no facts about brute contingent facts. There are no brute contingent facts. In future brute contingent facts. And so God doesn't have knowledge of them, but there are non-future brute contingent facts that God knows about, including the past and the present.
Oh, well, the present is just an infinitesimally, you could just, like, it's not a frozen picture. It's just like there's an infinitesimal kind of future happening in the present. Like,
do you think there is a present?
No, I don't.
Do you
I think we're sort of moving into the future constantly.
Okay, so do you think, what does it mean to say that there's a future then? Isn't that understood in terms of the present?
No, it's not. We're just moving into the future constantly, but we're not.
How do you distinguish between past and future?
Past is what you can look at that's behind you, and future is what you can look at as
behind you. Like, what are you talking? Be more clear.
I mean,
for prophecy to exist, God must be able to know the future.
Well, I mean, like
Well,
you're
that's
asking to
and he's saying
explain
there's
the
the
past.
future, but there's no present.
Like there's a linear. Okay, the on a macro physical level in the universe, things are operating in a linear fashion. So what's further, wherever you are, what's behind you in that linear function is the past, and what's in front
Wherever
of you.
you are, what does that mean? It's not present.
So like if I throw a baseball, right, and the baseball is in
If
midair.
you threw a baseball, or if you will throw a baseball, if you are
So
throwing a baseball, which one?
I'm throwing a baseball in real time.
I don't know what that means if you're saying present doesn't exist. Because if the present doesn't exist, you only have two tenses now, right? You have you will throw a baseball or you threw a baseball. There's no you are throwing a baseball.
Well, okay, so yeah, it's hard for me to describe the present with language. Just consider it like a sort of an infinitesimal space between the past and the future.
Okay, so there is a present.
There's a present in the same way that there's a point on the like.
Draw an X. Draw an X.
Like
and
if
then
you look at
past is on the left.
in a Cartesian plane, does a point have any area? No, but it's somewhere. Like that's how I would kind of equate.
Okay, is there a present? Yes or no?
I don't really know, honestly. I consider the present more of a concept. I don't claim to be able to really describe it.
So you don't know if you presently exist.
I would describe present existence as a sort of constant falling into the future, kind of.
So what actually exists? The past, the present, or the future?
I might just not have the language. I don't know. Like,
I think it's hard to describe, but whatever the difficulties of the language are, most people say, yeah, there are at least three types of tenses that I might use in the actual world. You know, I went to the store. I'm going to the store, or I will go to the store, or something like that. You know, like
yeah, and I think colloquially, like the present really, it's an extremely small like frame of the future or the past, right? Like, so just
My friend,
it seems like you're not projecting.
You don't think God exists in the past or in the future or in the present, or where does God exist to you?
Who are you asking that?
The open theist, or when does God exist to you?
Well, no, I think God is outside of time. So,
is God presently interceding for his
anyway,
saints?
I'm gonna go to bed or do something else. I'll see you later. Thanks, TJ, for the conversation.
Later,
Always a pleasure having you on.
Bye, guys.